A man with 24 hours to find a wife, a woman haunted by the child she couldn't save, a little girl who's already lost everything. What happens when three broken souls are forced together by desperation? Can a family be built from lies, or does it take something more dangerous? The truth? This is their story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you make it to the end, hit that like button. Now, let's begin. The bell above the door of Ward's General Store rang at 4:30, sharp and insistent, cutting through the quiet hum of late afternoon trade. Elena Ward looked up from the ledger she'd been pretending to focus on for the better part of an hour, her pen hovering above a column of numbers that hadn't changed in 20 minutes. The man who stepped through the doorway wasn't one she recognized, and that meant something in Iron Hollow. Population 362, give or take whoever had died or been born since the last county census. She knew faces, she knew names, she knew who drank too much and who beat their wives and who couldn't pay their tab but would, eventually, when the mines paid out. This man was different. He was tall, taller than most, with shoulders that looked like they'd been carved from the same granite that jutted out of the mountains surrounding the town. His coat was worn but well made, the kind that cost real money 5 years ago, and had been maintained with the kind of care that spoke of necessity rather than vanity. Dark hair, longer than fashion dictated, fell across a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't so deeply lined with exhaustion. But it was his eyes that stopped her, gray, like winter sky before snow, and absolutely desperate. "We're closing soon," Elena said, though they weren't, not for another 2 hours. The man didn't move from the doorway. "You Elena Ward?" "Depends on who's asking." "Caleb Mercer." The name rang a bell, distant and muffled. Mercer. She'd heard it before, though she couldn't place where. The mines, maybe. Or one of the logging camps up in the high country. Iron Hollow was the kind of place where men appeared and disappeared with the seasons, chasing work or running from something, sometimes both. "What can I do for you, Mr. Mercer?" He stepped fully into the store then, and she noticed he was favoring his left leg. Not a limp exactly, but a hesitation in his gait, like his body was remembering an old injury and compensating without conscious thought. "I need to make a purchase." "Then you've come to the right place." Elena set down her pen and stood, smoothing her apron out of habit. "What are you looking for?" Caleb Mercer walked to the counter with measured steps, each one deliberate. When he reached it, he placed both hands flat on the scarred wood surface and looked at her with those winter sky eyes. "A wife." Elena blinked. "Excuse me?" "I need a wife by tomorrow." The store was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall behind her. Elena glanced at it, 4:45 now, then back at the man who just said the most insane thing she'd heard in her 3 years running this place. "I think you're in the wrong establishment, Mr. Mercer. There's a church 2 streets over, and a saloon with questionable entertainment 3 streets past that. This is a general store." "I know what it is." His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "And I know what I'm asking." "Do you?" It wasn't a question. "I'll pay." "I'm sure you will, but I'm not for sale." "Everything's for sale." He said it flatly, without judgment, just a statement of fact. Elena felt her spine stiffen. "Then you've been spending time with the wrong sort of people." "Maybe." Caleb pulled his hands back from the counter and straightened, though the movement seemed to cost him something. "But I'm not here to debate philosophy. I'm here because I have a problem and 24 hours to solve it, and you're the only person in this town who might be desperate enough to help me." "Desperate." The word came out sharp. "Aren't you?" Elena's jaw tightened. She should throw him out. She should call for Sheriff Morrison, who was probably already half drunk at the saloon, but would stumble over here if she hollered loud enough. She should do anything except stand here having this conversation. But she didn't, because Caleb Mercer wasn't wrong. She was desperate, had been for 3 years since she'd stepped off the train with nothing but 2 bags and a past she couldn't outrun, desperate to disappear, desperate to be someone new, desperate to atone for something that couldn't be atoned for. "I think you should leave," she said quietly. "I will, but not until you hear me out." "I don't—" 5 minutes. His hands were shaking now, just slightly. "Give me 5 minutes, and if you still want me gone, I'll go. You'll never see me again." Elena looked at him, really looked at him. saw the tremor in his fingers, the way his jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath the stubble, saw the desperation that matched her own, reflected back like a mirror. 5 minutes, she said. Then you leave. Caleb nodded once, sharp and quick. Then he started talking. I'm not a good man, Miss Ward. I want that clear from the start. I've done things I'm not proud of, and I failed in ways that can't be undone. But I'm not here to confess or ask for forgiveness. I'm here because there's a child, a little girl named Lila, and she's arriving on the noon train tomorrow. And if I don't have a wife by then, they're going to take her away. Elena's chest tightened. Who's taking her away? The law, social services, whatever you want to call the people who decide whether a child has a proper home or not. And you don't. I'm a single man living alone in a cabin 15 miles from town. No family, no community ties. I hunt for a living and sell pelts when I need money. His laugh was bitter. In their eyes, I'm barely civilized. Are you? Civilized? He considered it. Probably not, but I'm all she's got. Who is she to you? The question hung between them, heavy and waiting. Caleb's throat worked as he swallowed, and for a moment Elena thought he might not answer. Then, she's my daughter. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through the quiet store. You have a daughter, Elena repeated slowly. I do now. Didn't know about her until 6 weeks ago. How do you not know you have a daughter? Because her mother never told me. The rawness in his voice was unmistakable. Mary. Her name was Mary Carver. We were engaged 7 years ago. I was working in the silver mines up near Leadville, saving money so we could get married properly. Had a little house picked out and everything. He stopped, and Elena watched him wrestle with whatever came next. There was an accident, he continued. Cave-in. Killed 12 men outright. I was one of the lucky ones. Just got crushed instead of buried. Broken back, broken leg, broken ribs. Spent 4 months in a hospital bed, and when I finally could walk again, it was with a limp and enough pain that I needed laudanum just to get through the day. Elena's eyes flicked to his left leg, understanding now. I wrote to Mary, Caleb said. Told her what happened. Told her I'd be back as soon as I could work again, soon as I could provide for her properly. But she wrote back and said she couldn't wait. Said she needed someone whole, someone who could give her the life she deserved. She broke the engagement and married someone else within the year. Elena caught herself. That must have been difficult. It was honest. Caleb's voice was flat. She didn't love me enough to wait for a cripple. I don't blame her for that. But what I didn't know, what she never told me, was that she was already pregnant when she wrote that letter. Elena's breath caught. Lila, she said softly. Lila, born 7 months after Mary married her new husband, Thomas Carver. He raised her as his own. As far as the girl knows, he was her father. Caleb's hands curled into fists on the counter. Mary died 2 months ago, fever, and Thomas died 3 weeks later, fell from a horse, broke his neck. Sweet Mercy. Mercy's got nothing to do with it. The bitterness was back. Before Mary died, she wrote me a letter. Had her sister deliver it after the funeral. In it, she told me everything. About Lila. About raising her with Thomas. About how she'd convinced herself she was doing the right thing, giving the girl a stable home with a man who could provide for her. And now they're both gone. And Lila's got no one except an aunt who can't afford another mouth to feed, and a father who didn't know she existed until he got a letter from a dead woman. Caleb's voice cracked. The aunt, Mary's sister, she contacted social services, told them about me. They sent a caseworker out to my cabin last week. What did they say? They said a single man living alone in the wilderness isn't a suitable guardian for a 7-year-old girl. They said if I want to keep her, I need to provide a stable home environment, a proper family structure. He spat the last words like they tasted bitter. They gave me 2 weeks to prove I could provide that, or Lila goes to an orphanage in Denver. Elena's stomach turned. She'd heard about those places, institutions that warehoused unwanted children like inventory, where care was measured in calories and square footage rather than love or attention. So you need a wife, she said. I need a woman willing to sign a marriage certificate and live in my house long enough to convince social services that Lila has a proper home. After that, he shrugged. After that, you can leave if you want. Divorce me, take whatever I have, I don't care. But I need someone standing next to me tomorrow when that train arrives, or they'll take her away and I'll never see her again." "Why me?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What? You said I was the only person desperate enough. Why?" "You don't know me. You walked into this store 5 minutes ago." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, and Elena had the unsettling feeling that he saw more than she wanted him to. "Because you're alone," he said quietly. "Because you run this store by yourself and you live in the room upstairs and you don't talk to anyone unless you have to. Because you've been in Iron Hollow for 3 years and nobody knows anything about you except that you appeared one day and haven't left since." He paused. "Because you look at every child who comes through that door like you're trying to memorize their face, and because you keep a photograph in your apron pocket that you take out when you think nobody's watching." Elena's hand moved instinctively to her pocket, where the small tintype was indeed tucked against the fabric. "You've been watching me. I've been in town exactly 4 times in the past 3 years, Miss Ward. Each time I came to this store. Each time I saw you." His voice softened just slightly. "Each time I recognized the look in your eyes, because I see it in my own mirror every morning." "And what look is that?" "The look of someone running from something they can't escape." The words hit harder than Elena wanted to admit. She turned away, busying herself with straightening a display of canned goods that didn't need straightening. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough." "You know nothing." She spun back to face him. "You walk in here with your sob story and your impossible request, and you think you can just, what, buy me? Like I'm merchandise? I'm not trying to buy you." Caleb's voice remained steady. "I'm offering you an arrangement, a transaction. You help me keep my daughter, and I give you whatever you need to start over somewhere else. Money, land, a clean break from whatever you're hiding from." "I'm not hiding." "We're all hiding from something." Elena wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Because he was right. She was hiding, had been for 3 years, ever since that night in Chicago when everything fell apart, and a child— She shoved the memory down, hard and fast. "Even if I agreed," she said carefully, "which I'm not saying I am, how would this work? We can't just get married overnight. Actually, we can. Judge Holloway owes me a favor. He'll sign the license and perform the ceremony tonight if I ask." "Tonight? The train arrives at noon tomorrow. We need to be married before then." Elena laughed, sharp and humorless. "This is insane." "Yes." "You're asking me to marry a complete stranger, move to a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and pretend to be a mother to a child I've never met?" "Yes." "And you think I'm desperate enough to agree to this?" Caleb didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He set it on the counter between them, and Elena heard the distinct clink of coins. $200, he said. "That's what I'm offering. $200 in gold plus half of everything I own. The cabin, the land, the hunting rights. You stay for 6 months, long enough to satisfy social services, and then you're free to go. Take the money, take your half of the property, sell it all, and start fresh somewhere new." "And the girl?" "Lila stays with me. That's not negotiable." Elena stared at the pouch. $200. That was more money than she'd saved in 3 years of running the store. Enough to disappear again, properly this time. Enough to go somewhere nobody would ever find her. Enough to bury the past. "Why would you give up half of everything you own for a child you've never met?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "Because I already abandoned her once. I didn't know I was doing it, but that doesn't matter. I wasn't there when she was born. I wasn't there when she took her first steps or said her first words. I wasn't there when her mother died, or when the man she thought was her father died. I wasn't there for any of it." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I can't change that. But I can be there now. I can give her a home and a chance to heal, and maybe that's enough." Elena looked at him, this desperate stranger offering her an escape in exchange for a lie. She should say no. She should throw him out and lock the door and forget this conversation ever happened. But then her hand moved to her pocket again, to the photograph of a little girl with dark curls and bright eyes, and she remembered what it felt like to fail a child who needed her. "I have conditions," she heard herself say. Caleb straightened. "Name them." "First, no lies to the girl. I won't pretend this is some grand romance. If she asks why we got married, we tell her the truth, that you needed help, and I agreed to provide it." "Agreed." "Second, I won't be treated like property. I'll have my own space, my own money, my own life. This is a business arrangement, not a real marriage. Understood. Third, if at any point I decide this isn't working, I can leave. No arguments, no guilt, no trying to change my mind. I walk away, and we're done. Fine. Elena took a breath. And fourth, you tell me the whole truth, not just the parts that make you look sympathetic. I want to know what happened in those mines, why you really live alone in the mountains, and what you're not telling me about this situation with Lila. That gave him pause. She watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. How much to reveal, how much to keep hidden. There was a woman, he said, finally. After Mary. After the accident. I was bitter and angry and full of laudanum, and she was kind to me when nobody else was. Her name was Sarah. Elena waited. I loved her, Caleb continued, his voice rough. Or I thought I did. It's hard to tell when you're drowning in opium and pain. We were together for almost a year. She wanted to get married, wanted to build a life, but I couldn't give her that. Couldn't give her anything except my own misery. What happened? She left. Found someone better. Someone whole. He paused. But before she did, she told me something I've never forgotten. She said I was so busy punishing myself for surviving that I'd forgotten how to live. Said I was treating my guilt like it made me special, like it set me apart from everyone else, when really it just made me alone. Was she right? Yes. The admission seemed to cost him. I've been alone ever since. Moved up into the mountains, built a cabin, told myself it was because I preferred the solitude. But the truth is I was hiding, from people, from connection, from anything that might make me feel something again. And now? Now I have a daughter who needs me, and I don't get to hide anymore. He looked at her directly. So that's the truth, Miss Ward. I'm a broken man who's been running from his own pain for 7 years, and I'm asking you, a woman who's clearly running from her own pain, to help me stop running long enough to give a child a chance at something better than we got. The honesty of it struck Elena like a physical blow. She'd expected excuses, justifications, self-pity. Instead, he'd given her the raw, ugly truth. I'll need an hour, she said. For what? To think. To make arrangements, to decide if I'm really going to do this insane thing. She gestured to the door. Come back at 6 o'clock. If I agree, we'll go see Judge Halloway tonight. If I don't, we never speak of this again. Caleb studied her face, then nodded slowly. 6 o'clock. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Miss Ward? Yes? Thank you. For listening, at least. Then he was gone, the bell above the door ringing once more as he disappeared into the gathering dusk. Elena stood alone in the quiet store, staring at the leather pouch on the counter. $200 in gold. 6 months of her life. A chance to start over. And a 7-year-old girl who'd lost everything. She pulled the tintype from her pocket with shaking hands. The little girl in the photograph stared up at her, frozen forever at age 5. Dark curls framing a face that would never age another day. I'm sorry, Annie, Elena whispered. I'm so sorry. Then she tucked the photograph away and started making a list of everything she'd need to close the store for 6 months. At exactly 6 o'clock, the bell rang again. Elena looked up from the ledger where she'd been documenting inventory, her handwriting neat and precise despite the tremor in her fingers. Caleb Mercer stood in the doorway, looking no less desperate than he had 2 hours ago, but somehow more present, like he'd used the intervening time to pull himself together. Well? He asked. Elena closed the ledger and stood. She'd changed from her work dress into something simpler, more practical. Her hair was pinned back and she'd left her apron upstairs. I have questions first. Ask them. The cabin. How isolated are we talking? 15 miles from town, accessible by wagon road in good weather. There's a stream for water, game for hunting, and enough flat land for a garden. The nearest neighbor is 8 miles away. That's very isolated. Yes. What about schooling? For Lila? There's a schoolhouse in Iron Hollow. I'll bring her to town 3 days a week, weather permitting. The teacher, Miss Brennan, has already agreed to take her on. Elena nodded slowly. Medical care? Doc Harrison makes rounds through the mountain settlements once a month. In emergencies, it's a hard ride to town, but it's possible. And social services? When will they check on us? Mrs. Beatrice Chen, the caseworker, said she'd visit within the first month to assess the home environment. After that, it depends on her report. So we need to convince her this is a real marriage. Yes. Elena walked around the counter, putting herself closer to him. In the lamplight, she could see the lines around his eyes more clearly, the silver threading through his dark hair. He was younger than she'd first thought, probably not more than 30, but life had aged him prematurely. What about sleeping arrangements? She asked bluntly. Caleb didn't flinch. There are 2 bedrooms. You'll have your own, door locks from the inside. And you'll respect that. I will. He paused. I'm not looking for a wife in any real sense, Miss Ward. I'm looking for someone to help me keep my daughter, that's all. What if Lila asks why we don't share a room? We tell her the truth, that adults sometimes prefer their own space. It's not uncommon. Elena considered this. And after 6 months, what happens when I leave? You take your money and go. I tell Lila that sometimes things don't work out, but that doesn't mean anyone failed. That sometimes people need different things. That's going to hurt her. Yes. Caleb's voice was steady, but not as much as growing up in an orphanage wondering why nobody wanted her. The logic was sound, even if it was brutal. Elena took a breath. I failed a child once, she said quietly. In Chicago. 3 years ago. Her name was Annie, and she was 5 years old, and she died because I wasn't paying attention. Caleb waited, not pushing. I was a nanny, Elena continued, for a wealthy family, the Hawthorns. They had 3 children, and Annie was the youngest. Sweet, curious, always asking questions about everything. Her throat tightened. One day I was supposed to be watching her in the park, but I was distracted. There was a man I'd been seeing, and he'd shown up unexpectedly, and we were arguing about something stupid, and I looked away for just a moment. She stopped, the memory threatening to overwhelm her. There was a pond, she said. Annie loved the ducks. She'd wandered over to see them, and she leaned too far, and she fell in. By the time I realized she was gone, by the time I ran over and pulled her out, it was too late. She'd drowned in 3 feet of water while I was 10 yards away, arguing about nothing that mattered. Caleb's expression didn't change, but his eyes held something that might have been understanding. The Hawthorns blamed me, Elena said. They were right to. The police investigated, decided it was a tragic accident, no criminal charges. But the family made sure everyone knew what happened, made sure I could never work as a nanny again, never be trusted with children again. The newspapers ran the story for weeks. Negligent caretaker causes child's death. My face was everywhere. So you ran. So I ran. Elena met his gaze. I changed my name, took what little money I had, and came west. Found this store, bought it from the widow who was selling, and tried to disappear. Tried to become someone new. Did it work? No. The word came out flat. You can't outrun guilt. It follows you everywhere. I know. They stood in the quiet store, 2 people bound by shared failure, and Elena realized that Caleb Mercer had told her the truth when he said he recognized the look in her eyes. If I do this, she said, if I agree to this arrangement, I need you to understand something. I can't promise I'll be good at it. I can't promise I won't fail again. All I can promise is that I'll try and that I'll be honest. With you, with Lila, with myself. That's all anyone can do. Elena took a breath. Then I'll do it. I'll marry you, I'll move to your cabin, and I'll help you keep your daughter. Something shifted in Caleb's expression, not quite relief, but close to it. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet. We haven't gotten through the hard part. What's the hard part? Everything that comes after I say yes. Judge Holloway's house sat on the edge of town, a small but well-maintained structure with a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Lamplight glowed in the windows as Caleb and Elena approached, their footsteps crunching in the frost that had already begun to form on the ground. Caleb knocked once, firm and decisive. The door opened to reveal a man in his 60s, white-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing shirt sleeves and suspenders despite the evening chill. Mercer, he said, wondered if you'd actually show up. I said I would. You say a lot of things. The judge's gaze shifted to Elena. And who's this? Elena Ward. She runs the general store in town. I know who she is. Judge Holloway stepped back, gesturing them inside. Question is, does she know what she's getting into? She does, Elena said, finding her voice. The judge studied her for a moment, then nodded. Come in then. Let's get this done before I change my mind about owing you favors, Mercer. The interior of the house was warm and cluttered with books. Shelves lined every wall, stacked with volumes on law, history, philosophy. A fire crackled in the hearth, and a cat dozed on the windowsill. Whiskey? Holloway offered. No, Caleb said. Yes, said Elena. The judge raised an eyebrow but poured 2 glasses, handing one to Elena. She took a sip, feeling the burn settle into her chest. You understand this is legally binding, Holloway said, addressing them both. Once I sign that license and perform the ceremony, you're married in the eyes of the law. Divorce is possible but complicated. There are processes, fees, waiting periods. We understand, Caleb said. Do you? The judge looked at Elena. Miss Ward, has this man coerced you in any way? Threatened you? Offered you payment for this arrangement? Elena appreciated the directness. He's offered me payment, yes, but I'm agreeing of my own free will. And you understand that accepting money for marriage could be considered fraud if discovered? I do. Then you're both fools. Holloway drained his own whiskey glass and set it down with a decisive clink. But you're adults, and I'm a judge, not your conscience. Let me get the papers. He disappeared into another room, leaving Elena and Caleb standing awkwardly by the fire. The cat opened one eye, assessed them, then went back to sleep. You can still change your mind, Caleb said quietly. So can you. I won't. Neither will I. Holloway returned with a sheaf of papers and a worn Bible. Standard marriage license, fill in your names, sign at the bottom. I'll witness and file it with the county tomorrow. Elena took the pen he offered and wrote her name in careful script. Elena Margaret Ward. Her real name, the one she'd carried from Chicago. The one she'd thought she'd left behind. Caleb signed below her, Caleb James Mercer. Now then, Holloway said, setting the papers aside, let's make this official. The ceremony was brief and perfunctory, stripped of any romance or sentiment. Holloway read the legal requirements in a monotone, asked them to confirm their consent, and pronounced them husband and wife with all the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. You may kiss if you want, he added. Not required. Elena and Caleb looked at each other. After a moment, Caleb extended his hand. Elena took it, and they shook once, formal and strange. Congratulations, Holloway said dryly. Try not to make me regret this. What? They walked back to the general store in silence, the marriage license tucked into Caleb's coat pocket. The night had grown colder, and Elena pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I'll pick you up at 10 tomorrow morning, Caleb said when they reached the store. That'll give us time to get to the station before the train arrives. I'll be ready. Pack light. We can come back for the rest later if you need to. I don't have much. Caleb nodded, then hesitated. Miss Ward. Elena, we're married now, apparently. Elena. The name sounded strange in his voice. I know this isn't what anyone would choose, but I meant what I said. I'll give you your space, your freedom. You won't be a prisoner in this arrangement. I know. And if you change your mind, I won't. She looked at him directly. I made a promise to a child once, and I broke it. I'm not doing that again. Whatever this is, whatever we're doing, I'm seeing it through. Something like respect flickered across Caleb's face. Then I'll see you tomorrow. He turned to leave, then paused. Elena? Yes? The girl in the photograph, Annie. How old would she be now? The question caught her off guard. 8, almost 9. Same age as Lila, then, or close to it. Elena's throat tightened. Yes. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, and Elena had the unsettling feeling that he understood exactly what she was trying to do, exactly who she was trying to save. Good night, Elena. Good night, Caleb. She watched him disappear into the darkness, then climbed the stairs to her small room above the store. The space was sparse, a bed, a washstand, a trunk for her belongings. She'd never bothered to make it a home because she'd never planned to stay. Now she was leaving, and she felt nothing except the weight of the choice she'd just made. Elena pulled out the old carpet bag she'd brought from Chicago and began to pack. Clothes, toiletries, a few books. The photograph of Annie went into her pocket, where it had lived for 3 years. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in oilcloth, was the newspaper clipping she'd kept from that last day in Chicago. She unfolded it carefully, though she'd read it so many times she could recite it from memory. Child drowns while caretaker distracted. Below the headline was a sketch of Annie's face, rendered in the stark black and white of newsprint, and below that a single paragraph about Elena. Miss Elena Ward, employed as a nanny by the Hawthorne family, was present at the time of the incident but failed to prevent the tragedy. The family has declined to press charges, but has expressed their profound disappointment in Miss Ward's negligence. Profound disappointment. That was the phrase that had haunted her. Not anger, not hatred, just disappointment. Elena folded the clipping and put it back in the trunk. She wouldn't bring it to the cabin. Some things deserved to be left behind. She finished packing, then lay down on the bed without undressing, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, she would meet a 7-year-old girl who'd lost everything. Tomorrow, she would begin living a lie designed to save that girl from an even worse fate. Tomorrow, she would try to become someone worth trusting again, if that was even possible. Elena didn't sleep. She watched the hours creep by on the small clock by her bedside, watched the darkness outside her window gradually lighten into gray dawn. At 7, she rose and dressed carefully in her most practical travel clothes, a dark wool skirt, a white blouse, a heavy coat. At 8, she went downstairs and wrote a note for Mr. Patterson, the man who delivered goods to the store twice a week. She explained that she would be away for several months on family business, and that he should hold all deliveries until further notice. She left payment for his trouble and pinned the note to the inside of the door. At 9, she double-checked her packed bag and counted the money in her small savings box. $37.60. Not much, but hers. She divided it into 3 hiding places, some in her boot, some sewn into the lining of her coat, some in the bottom of her bag. At 9:30, she stood at the window and watched the street below, waiting. At precisely 10 o'clock, a wagon appeared around the corner. Caleb Mercer sat in the driver's seat, handling the reins with the easy competence of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. The wagon itself was simple but well-maintained, pulled by 2 sturdy horses that looked like they could handle mountain terrain. Elena picked up her bag and took one last look at the room that had been her refuge for 3 years. Then she locked the door behind her and walked downstairs. Caleb was already waiting by the wagon when she emerged from the store. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." He took her bag and secured it in the back of the wagon, then offered his hand to help her up to the seat. His grip was firm and calloused, the hand of someone who worked with his hands every day. Elena settled onto the bench, and Caleb climbed up beside her. The wagon creaked under their combined weight, and the horses shifted restlessly. "The station's about a mile," Caleb said. "We'll be there with time to spare." "Good." They rode in silence through the morning streets of Iron Hollow. The town was beginning to wake up. Shopkeepers opening their doors, children running errands, the blacksmith's hammer already ringing in the distance. A few people turned to stare as they passed, and Elena knew the gossip would start before they even reached the station. Elena Ward, leaving town with Caleb Mercer. Married, they say. Nobody saw it coming. Let them talk. She'd be gone soon enough. The train station sat at the eastern edge of town, a small wooden structure with a platform barely long enough to accommodate 3 passenger cars. A handful of people were already waiting, travelers heading east, families seeing off relatives, the station master checking his pocket watch. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop and set the brake. They climbed down together, and Elena felt the weight of curious eyes on them. "Mercer," the station master called out. "Heard you were expecting someone on the noon train." "I am." "Wife know about it?" The man's grin was sly, gossipy. "She does." Caleb's voice was flat. "Considering she's standing right here." The station master's grin faltered. "You got married?" "Yesterday, to Elena Ward." A ripple of whispers went through the small crowd. Elena kept her chin up, her expression neutral. Let them be shocked. Let them wonder. "Well," the station master said, clearly thrown. "Congratulations, I suppose." "Thanks." Caleb turned to Elena. "Train should be here in about an hour. You want to wait on the platform or in the wagon?" "Platform," Elena said. "I'd rather see her coming." They found a bench at the far end of the platform, away from the other travelers. Caleb sat with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped, staring down the empty tracks. Elena sat beside him, trying to imagine what the next hour would bring. Tell me about her, she said. What do you know about Lila? Caleb took a breath. Not much. Mary's letter said she's quiet, likes to read, doesn't make friends easily. She knows her mother died, knows Thomas died, but according to the aunt, she hasn't cried yet, just gone silent. That's not uncommon. Grief affects children differently. You sound like you know. I've seen it before. Some children cry, some get angry, some just shut down. It's a protection mechanism. Will she come out of it? Eventually, if she feels safe. Elena paused. Does she know about you? That you're her real father? Mary's sister told her, said she tried to explain it gently, but I don't know how you explain gently that everything you thought was true about your family was a lie. You can't. Elena's voice was soft. But you can be there when she's ready to talk about it. Caleb looked at her. You're good at this, talking about children. I used to be. What changed? I stopped trusting myself. They fell back into silence, watching the empty tracks. The sun climbed higher, warming the platform despite the autumn chill. Other travelers came and went, casting glances at the odd couple waiting together. At 11:30, the station master emerged from his office with a telegram. Train's running on time, should be here in 20 minutes. Caleb nodded, but didn't respond. Elena watched his hands tighten into fists, then deliberately relax. He was nervous, she realized, terrified even, though he was hiding it well. It's going to be all right, she said. You don't know that. No, but we'll make it as right as we can. He looked at her, and Elena saw gratitude in his eyes. Thank you. For being here. For doing this. Thank me after we get through today. At 11:45, they heard the whistle in the distance. Elena's heart began to race. This was it, the moment when everything became real. When a little girl who'd lost everything would step off a train and into the care of a father she didn't know and a stepmother who was a complete stranger. The train appeared around the bend, smoke billowing from its stack, brakes squealing as it began to slow. The other travelers on the platform surged forward, eager to board or greet arrivals. Caleb and Elena stayed where they were, waiting. The train shuddered to a stop with a final hiss of steam. Doors opened, and passengers began to disembark. Men in suits, women with parcels, children running ahead of their parents. And then, at the door of the third car, a small figure appeared. She was tiny, even for 7 years old. Dark hair pulled back in braids that were coming loose. A worn coat that was slightly too big. A small carpet bag clutched in both hands. And eyes that were far too old for her face. Elena's breath caught, because she'd seen those eyes before, in the mirror, after Annie died. Eyes that had seen too much and understood that the world was not safe. Beside the girl stood a woman in her 30s, thin and harried looking, who scanned the platform with obvious impatience. When her gaze landed on Caleb, she grabbed the girl's shoulder and steered her forward. "Mr. Mercer?" she called out. Caleb stood. "That's me." The woman approached, pulling the girl along. Up close, Elena could see the resemblance between the child and Caleb. The same gray eyes, the same dark hair, the same stubborn set to the jaw. "I'm Vera Whitmore, Mary's sister." The woman's voice was clipped, businesslike. "This is Lila." The girl said nothing, just stared at Caleb with those two old eyes. "Hello, Lila," Caleb said. His voice was gentle but uncertain, like he wasn't sure how to talk to a child. Lila didn't respond. Vera sighed. "She hasn't said much since Thomas died. The doctor says it's shock. Said she'll come around eventually." She thrust a small trunk toward Caleb. "Here's her things. Not much, but it's all she's got." Caleb took the trunk, and Vera immediately turned her attention to Elena. "And you are?" "Elena Mercer, Caleb's wife." Vera's eyebrows shot up. "Wife?" Mary's letter didn't mention. "We married yesterday," Caleb said. "Well?" Vera looked between them, clearly suspicious. "That was fast?" "Circumstances required it." "I see." Vera didn't sound convinced, but she didn't push. Instead, she crouched down to Lila's level. "All right, sweetheart, this is your father, and this is your new mother. They're going to take care of you now." Lila's gaze shifted to Elena, and Elena felt the weight of that assessment. The girl was looking for something, safety, maybe, or trustworthiness. Something to tell her whether these strangers could be believed. Elena met her eyes and didn't look away. "Hello, Lila," she said quietly. My name is Elena. I know this is frightening and strange, and I know you don't have any reason to trust us yet, but we're going to do our best to take care of you." Lila's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or just acknowledgement that Elena had spoken to her like a person instead of a problem. Vera stood up, brushing off her skirts. "Well, I've done my part. The social worker, Mrs. Chen, she'll be by to check on things within the month. Make sure you're treating her right." "We will," Caleb said. "Better." Vera's voice turned hard. "Because if I hear otherwise, I'll be back. Mary was my sister, and I won't have her daughter mistreated." "Understood." Vera turned back to Lila one last time. "Be good, sweetheart. Write if you need anything." Then she was gone, boarding the train without a backward glance. Elena watched her disappear into the passenger car and wondered what kind of person could deliver a grieving child to strangers and walk away so easily. The kind who's overwhelmed and can't handle one more responsibility, she thought. The kind who's barely holding her own life together. The kind I used to judge before I understood how easy it is to fail. The train's whistle blew and the engine began to chug, pulling away from the station in a cloud of steam and smoke. Within moments, it was gone, leaving the three of them alone on the platform, Caleb, Elena, and Lila. A family built from desperation and lies. "Well," Caleb said after a long moment, "we should get going. It's a long ride to the cabin." He picked up Lila's trunk and headed toward the wagon. Elena looked down at the small girl standing beside her, still clutching her carpet bag, still silent. "Would you like me to carry that for you?" Elena asked, gesturing to the bag. Lila shook her head. "All right, but if you change your mind, just let me know." They walked to the wagon together, and Elena helped Lila climb into the back, where Caleb had arranged blankets to make a soft seat. The girl settled in without a word, her bag still clutched to her chest. Elena climbed up to the front bench, and Caleb joined her. He released the brake, and the wagon lurched into motion. They left Iron Hollow behind, heading into the mountains where a cabin waited, where a life they'd agreed to pretend at would begin. And in the back of the wagon, a small girl watched them with eyes that had already learned not to hope for anything. The wagon climbed into the mountains along a road that grew narrower with each passing mile. Elena gripped the edge of the bench as the wheels found ruts and stones, jarring her bones with every impact. Beside her, Caleb handled the reins with steady hands, his eyes scanning the path ahead as if reading a language she didn't understand. Behind them, Lila hadn't made a sound. Elena glanced back twice in the first hour. The girl sat exactly where they'd placed her, surrounded by blankets, her carpet bag still clutched against her chest. Her eyes were open, watching the trees pass, but her expression remained blank, like she was cataloging everything and feeling nothing. "How much farther?" Elena asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving town. "Another 2 hours. Maybe 3 if the road's worse higher up." "It gets worse than this?" Caleb's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "This is the good part." Elena looked down at the path they were following, if it could even be called a path, more like a suggestion of where wagons had passed before, carved into the mountainside by necessity rather than design. "What do you do in winter?" "Stay put, mostly. Come to town once a month for supplies if the weather holds. Otherwise, you wait it out." "That sounds lonely." "It is." He said it simply, without self-pity. Just fact. They fell back into silence, and Elena tried to imagine living in a place where being cut off from the world wasn't just possible but expected, where winter meant isolation measured in months, not days. She'd run to Iron Hollow to escape, but even there she'd had the comfort of other people existing nearby. Voices through walls, footsteps on the street, the persistent hum of human presence, even when she avoided it. This would be different. The road climbed higher, and the air grew thinner and colder. Elena pulled her shawl tighter and wished she'd thought to pack warmer clothes. The trees changed as they ascended, from oak and maple to pine and spruce, their branches heavy with needles that blocked the afternoon sun. "We'll stop soon," Caleb said, reading her discomfort. "Let the horses rest. Get some food in us." "Does she eat?" Elena asked quietly, jerking her head toward the back. "I don't know." The admission hung between them, sharp with all the things they didn't know about the child they'd just collected like a package. Caleb pulled the wagon off the road into a small clearing where a fallen log provided natural seating. He set the brake and climbed down, then went to check on the horses. Elena turned to look at Lila. "We're stopping for a bit," she said. "Would you like to get down, stretch your legs?" Lila looked at her but didn't move. Elena climbed down herself, her legs stiff from sitting, and walked around to the back of the wagon. Up close, she could see details she'd missed at the station. The girl's braids were uneven, like someone had done them in a hurry. Her coat had been mended multiple times, the stitches careful but visible. Her hands, still gripping the carpet bag, were small and chapped from cold. "I'm going to lower the back gate," Elena said. "You don't have to get down if you don't want to. But if you do, I'll help you." She unlatched the gate and let it swing down. Lila watched her with those careful, measuring eyes. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the girl scooted forward until her legs dangled over the edge. She was wearing shoes that were too big, Elena noticed. Someone else's shoes, probably. Hand-me-downs from a cousin or neighbor. Elena held out her hands. "I've got you." Lila ignored the offered help and jumped down herself. She landed hard, stumbled, then caught her balance. The carpet bag never left her grip. "You're strong," Elena said. Lila didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either, just stood there, waiting. Caleb returned from tending the horses with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Got some bread and cheese. Not much, but it'll hold us until we get to the cabin." He spread the cloth on the log and divided the food into rough portions. Elena sat down and took hers, suddenly aware of how little she'd eaten that morning. Caleb sat on the other end of the log, leaving space between them. Lila remained standing, watching them eat. "You should eat something," Caleb said to her. His voice was gentle but awkward, like he was translating from a language he barely spoke. "It's a long ride still." The girl's eyes shifted to the food, then back to Caleb's face, calculating something. "It's not poisoned," Elena said, "if that's what you're worried about." Lila's gaze snapped to her, and Elena saw a flicker of surprise, like the girl hadn't expected to be understood so directly. "And we're not going to force you to eat," Elena continued, "but your body needs food, and this is what we have, so if you want it, it's there." She took another bite of her own bread, making it clear the offer was genuine but not desperate, not pleading. After a moment, Lila moved closer. She didn't sit on the log with them, but she did pick up the portion Caleb had set aside for her. She ate standing up, small, careful bites, never taking her eyes off them for long. "Good?" Elena asked. Lila's expression didn't change, but she kept eating. Elena decided to count it as progress. They finished their meal in silence. Caleb rewrapped the remaining food and secured it back in the wagon. Elena walked to the edge of the clearing and looked out at the view spreading below them. Mountains stacked on mountains, pine forest stretching as far as she could see, and somewhere far beyond, the town they'd left behind. "It's beautiful," she said, though the word felt inadequate. "It's isolated," Caleb replied, coming to stand beside her, "which is what I wanted when I came up here. But for a child, it's whatever we make it." He looked at her. "You sound certain." "I'm not. But I know that children adapt to what's around them. If this place feels safe, she'll learn to love it. If it feels like a prison, that's what it'll become." "Which one do you think it'll be?" Elena watched Lila, who had wandered over to examine a pine cone that had fallen near the wagon. The girl picked it up, turned it over in her hands, then carefully tucked it into her coat pocket. "I don't know yet," Elena said honestly. "Ask me again in a month." They loaded back into the wagon and continued climbing. The road did get worse, just as Caleb had warned. Twice, Elena had to get out and walk beside the wagon while Caleb coaxed the horses over particularly rough sections. The second time, Lila climbed out too, without being asked, and walked on her own. The sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon when the road finally leveled out, and Caleb pointed ahead. "There." Elena followed his gesture and saw it. A cabin nestled in a clearing, surrounded by pine trees and backed by a rocky cliff face. Smoke rose from the chimney, which seemed impossible until she realized Caleb must have left a fire banked before coming to town. The cabin itself was larger than she'd expected. Not spacious, but substantial. Log walls chinked with mud and moss, a covered porch running along the front, windows with actual glass instead of oiled paper. Behind it, she could see what looked like a barn or storage shed, and beyond that, the land sloped down to a stream she could hear but not yet see. "You built this?" Elena asked. Most of it. The original structure was here when I arrived, but it was barely standing. I rebuilt the walls, added the porch, put in the windows. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. It's not much, but it's solid. Elena climbed down and really looked at the place that would be her home for the next 6 months. The porch had been swept recently. The door hung straight on its hinges. Even the steps looked level and secure. This wasn't the dwelling of a man who'd given up on life. This was the home of someone who still cared about the details, even when nobody was watching. Caleb helped Lila down from the wagon, then grabbed the girl's trunk and Elena's bag. I'll show you inside. Get you settled before dark. The interior of the cabin was dim, lit only by the fire in the hearth and the fading daylight through the windows. But as Elena's eyes adjusted, she saw that the space had been arranged with unexpected care. The main room served as kitchen and living area combined. A table with 4 chairs sat near the hearth. Shelves lined one wall holding dishes, pots, and food stores. A rocking chair sat in the corner, and beside it, a small basket filled with kindling. But what caught Elena's attention was the far wall, where 2 doors stood side by side. Bedrooms, Caleb said, following her gaze. Yours is on the left. Lila's is on the right. Mine's the loft. He gestured to a ladder that led to an opening in the ceiling. You're sleeping in the loft? Made sense to give you both the proper rooms. Elena looked at the ladder, then at Caleb's bad leg. That can't be easy for you. I manage. He carried Lila's trunk to the right-hand door and pushed it open. Elena followed and stopped in the doorway. The room was small but complete. A bed with a quilted coverlet, a chest for clothes, a small table with a lamp, and on the wall someone had painted a border of wildflowers. Simple but cheerful, clearly done by hand. When did you do this? Elena asked. Had a week after I got Mary's letter. Figured if I was going to bring a child here, she should have something that felt like it was hers. Lila had followed them and now stood in the doorway beside Elena, looking at the room with that same careful, measuring expression. What do you think? Elena asked her. The girl stepped inside, still carrying her carpet bag. She walked to the bed and ran her hand over the quilt. Then she looked at the painted flowers. Her fingers traced one of them, following the curve of a petal. She didn't speak, but something in her posture shifted, just slightly, like a person seeing something they didn't expect and not quite knowing how to react. I'll let you get settled, Caleb said. Your things are in the trunk. If you need anything, he stopped, seeming to realize he was talking to a child who hadn't spoken a word since they'd met her. We'll be right outside, Elena finished for him. They left Lila in her room and walked back to the main area. Caleb showed Elena her own room, which was similar to Lila's but slightly larger. A bed, a chest, a table, a chair, simple and functional. Locks from the inside, Caleb said, pointing to the bolt on the door. Like I promised. Thank you. He nodded and turned to go, then hesitated. I know this is strange, all of it, but I meant what I said about giving you space, about this being an arrangement, not a, I know. Elena cut him off before he could make it more awkward. We're clear on the terms. Right, good. He rubbed the back of his neck. I'll start supper then. Hope you're not expecting anything fancy. After 3 years of cooking for myself, anything I don't have to make is fancy. That got the ghost of a smile from him. Fair enough. Elena unpacked her bag while Caleb worked in the kitchen. She could hear him moving around, the clatter of pots, the creak of the pump as he drew water. Domestic sounds that should have been comforting but instead felt surreal. 24 hours ago, she'd been alone in her room above the general store, same as every other night for 3 years. Now she was in a cabin on a mountain, married to a stranger, responsible for a traumatized child. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the tintype of Annie from her pocket. The little girl's face stared up at her, frozen forever at 5 years old. I don't know what I'm doing, Elena whispered to the photograph. I don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to try. I owe you that much. She tucked the photograph into the drawer of the bedside table, hiding it away but keeping it close. A knock on the doorframe made her look up. Lila stood there, still wearing her coat, still holding her carpet bag. Can I help you with something? Elena asked. Lila stared at her for a long moment. Then, in a voice so quiet Elena almost missed it, she said, Where's the privy? The words were rusty, like they'd been locked away for weeks and had forgotten how to sound natural. But they were words, actual words. Out back, Elena said, keeping her voice calm despite the flutter of hope in her chest. I'll show you. She led Lila through the main room, where Caleb was stirring something over the fire. He glanced up and their eyes met briefly. He'd heard it too. Elena showed Lila the path to the small outhouse behind the cabin, then waited on the porch. The evening air was cold and getting colder. Winter would come early this high up, she realized. Maybe it was already here. When Lila returned, Elena said, "You can leave your bag inside, you know. Nobody's going to take it." Lila looked down at the carpet bag, her fingers tightening on the handles. "Or you can keep it with you," Elena added. "Whatever makes you feel safer." The girl's eyes lifted to Elena's face, searching. Then she spoke again, just as quietly as before. "Are you really married to him?" "Yes." "Since yesterday?" "Yes." "Why?" Elena took a breath. This was the moment Caleb had worried about, the moment when they'd have to decide how much truth to tell. "Because he needed help," Elena said, "and I agreed to give it." "You don't love him?" It wasn't a question. "No, not the way you probably think married people should love each other." "Then why did you say yes?" Elena crouched down so she was at eye level with Lila. "Because sometimes people need help, and sometimes the right thing to do is help them even when it's hard or strange or doesn't make perfect sense. Your father needed someone to help him keep you safe, and I needed a reason to try being better than I have been." Lila processed this with that too old expression. "What if you leave?" "I might. After 6 months, I'm allowed to." "What happens to me?" "You stay here with your father. This is your home now, whether I'm here or not." "But the lady said I need a proper family, a mother and a father." "The lady was wrong," Elena said flatly. "What you need is people who care about you and keep you safe. Sometimes that's a mother and father. Sometimes it's just a father. Sometimes it's someone else entirely. But it's not about the title. It's about whether they show up and do the work." Lila considered this. "My mama died." "I know. I'm sorry." "And Thomas, he died too." "I know that too." Everyone leaves. The words were small and broken, and Elena felt them like a physical blow. "Yes," she said, "because lying would be worse. Sometimes people leave, sometimes they die. Sometimes they go away and don't come back. That's true. And it's terrible, and it's not fair. So why should I believe you won't leave too? Because I'm telling you the truth. I'm not promising I'll stay forever. I'm not promising this will be perfect. But I'm promising that for the next 6 months, I'll be here. And if I do leave after that, it won't be a surprise. It won't be a secret. You'll know, and your father will know, and we'll all make that decision together." Lila's eyes were wet now, the first sign of emotion Elena had seen from her all day. "I don't want more people to leave," she whispered. "I know." Elena's own throat was tight. "But here's the thing about people leaving. Sometimes they do, and you survive it anyway. You're already surviving it. You're still here, still breathing, still asking hard questions. That takes strength." A tear slipped down Lila's cheek, then another. The girl wiped at them angrily, like they'd betrayed her. "It's okay to cry," Elena said softly. "I don't want to." "Okay, then you don't have to." But the tears kept coming anyway, silent and steady, and Lila's face crumpled with the effort of trying to hold them back. Elena didn't move closer, didn't try to touch her, just stayed there, present and steady, while the child's grief finally broke through. When Lila's breathing started to hitch, Elena said quietly, "If you want to be alone, I'll go inside. If you want to sit, we can sit. If you want to keep standing here, that's fine too." Lila wiped her face with her sleeve. "Can we sit?" "Yes." They sat on the porch steps together, a careful distance between them. The sun was almost gone now, the sky turning purple and gold. From inside the cabin, they could hear Caleb moving around, giving them privacy. Lila cried quietly for a long time. Elena didn't try to stop her or comfort her with empty words. She just sat there, close enough to be present, but far enough to give the girl space to fall apart. Eventually, the tears slowed. Lila pulled the pine cone from her pocket and turned it over in her hands. "I found one of these with Thomas," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "Before he died. We were walking in the woods and he showed me how they only open when it's warm and close when it's cold to protect the seeds inside. That's true. He said people are like that too sometimes. We close up when things are hard to protect the soft parts. He sounds like he was smart. He was. Lila's fingers traced the scales of the pine cone. He wasn't my real father, but he was good to me. He read me stories and taught me things, and he never made me feel like I wasn't his. He loved you, but he left anyway. He didn't choose to leave. Death isn't a choice. It feels the same. Elena didn't have an answer for that, because Lila was right. To a 7-year-old girl, dead or gone, it all felt like abandonment. Your real father, Lila said after a moment. Caleb, what's he like? I don't know him well yet. We only met yesterday. But you married him. I did. That's strange. Yes, it is. Lila looked at her, and Elena saw a flicker of something that might have been respect, like the girl appreciated the honesty more than false reassurance. Is he nice? I think he's trying to be, but he's scared too. Of what? Of failing you, of not knowing how to be a father, of doing everything wrong. Will he? Probably sometimes, Elena said. People mess up, but I think he'll try hard not to. Lila was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up, still holding the pine cone. I'm hungry now. Okay, let's see what he made. They went inside together. Caleb had set the table with 3 bowls of stew and a loaf of bread. He looked up when they entered, his eyes going immediately to Lila's tear-stained face. Everything all right? He asked carefully. We're okay, Elena said. Just talking. Caleb nodded, not pushing. Food's ready if you are. They sat at the table, Caleb at one end, Elena and Lila on the sides. The stew was simple but good, thick with vegetables and venison. Lila ate slowly, still cautious, but she finished her entire bowl. Can I have more bread? She asked quietly. Of course. Caleb passed her the loaf, and Elena saw his hand shake slightly as he did. They ate in silence, the only sounds the scrape of spoons and the crackle of the fire. When they finished, Elena started to gather the dishes, but Caleb stopped her. I'll handle it. You've had a long day. So have you. I'm used to it. Elena didn't argue. Instead, she turned to Lila. Do you want help getting ready for bed? Lila hesitated, then nodded. They went to the small bedroom together. Elena helped Lila unpack her trunk, hanging the few dresses and putting away the underclothes and stockings. At the bottom of the trunk was a worn rag doll with button eyes and a stitched smile. Lila picked it up carefully. This was my mama's when she was little. She gave it to me when I turned 4. What's her name? Rosie. She's beautiful. Lila held the doll close. Can I sleep with her? Of course you can. This is your room. You can do whatever makes you comfortable. Elena found a nightgown in the trunk and helped Lila change. The girl's ribs were visible through her thin skin, and Elena made a mental note to make sure she ate more regularly. Once Lila was in her nightgown, she climbed into bed with Rosie tucked under her arm. Elena pulled the quilt up and tucked it around her. Do you need anything else? Elena asked. Lila shook her head, then stopped. Can you leave the door open? Just a little? Yes. Elena moved to the door, then paused. Lila? What? You did a good job today. I know it was hard. The girl looked at her with those careful eyes. Will you still be here tomorrow? Yes. Promise? Elena thought about all the promises she'd made and broken, all the times she'd failed when someone needed her. But she also thought about what she'd told Lila on the porch, about truth being more important than comfort. I promise I'll be here tomorrow, she said, and the day after that, and every day for the next 6 months. After that, we'll talk about what comes next. But for now, yes, I'll be here. Lila nodded and closed her eyes. Elena watched her for a moment, then slipped out, leaving the door cracked open as requested. Caleb was sitting by the fire when she emerged, staring into the flames. He looked up when she approached. She asleep? Not yet, but soon. What did you two talk about? On the porch? Elena sat in the rocking chair. The truth. About why we got married. About the fact that I might leave after 6 months. About her fear that everyone abandons her. Caleb's jaw tightened. You told her you're planning to leave? I told her I'm allowed to leave after 6 months, and that if I do, it won't be a surprise. That we'd make the decision together. You think that helped? I think it was better than lying. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. You're probably right. I don't want her to spend every day waiting for you to go. She's going to spend every day waiting for someone to leave anyway. That's what happens when you lose everyone you love before you're 8 years old. At least this way she knows the terms. Caleb rubbed his face with both hands. I don't know how to do this. How to be what she needs. Neither do I. But you're better at it than me. The way you talked to her, the way you knew what to say. I spent 3 years working with children before I killed one, Elena said flatly. That doesn't make me better at this. It makes me more dangerous, because I know exactly how badly I can fail. The words landed hard in the quiet cabin. Caleb looked at her, and Elena saw understanding in his eyes. We're both terrified, he said. Yes. And we're both going to mess this up. Probably. But we're going to try anyway. Yes. Caleb leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Chen is coming in 3 weeks, the social worker. She'll want to see Lila settled, see us acting like a real family. Then we'll act like one. What if she can tell we're lying? Everyone lies to social workers, Elena said. They expect it. What matters is whether Lila seems safe and cared for. Whether she's eating and sleeping and adjusting. If we can show that, the rest doesn't matter. And if we can't, then they take her and you spend the rest of your life knowing you tried and failed. But at least you'll have tried. Caleb absorbed this. You're not very comforting, you know that? I'm honest. That's more useful than comfort. A sound from Lila's room made them both turn. A soft cry, quickly muffled. Elena started to rise, but Caleb stopped her. Let me, he said. She should know I'm here too. He walked to Lila's door and knocked softly. Lila, you okay? No answer, but another small sound that might have been crying. Caleb pushed the door open carefully. Can I come in? Elena couldn't hear Lila's response, but Caleb stepped inside. She stayed in the rocking chair, giving them privacy but listening in case she was needed. Bad dream? Caleb's voice was gentle, uncertain. A whisper Elena couldn't make out. I know. I get them too sometimes. A pause. About the mines, the cave-in. Sometimes I dream I'm still buried and I wake up and I can't breathe. More quiet words from Lila. What helps me is remembering where I am now, feeling the bed under me, the air moving, the sounds around me, real things, not dream things. Silence. Do you want me to stay until you fall asleep? I can sit here, if that helps. A longer pause, then what sounded like a yes. Elena heard the scrape of a chair being pulled close to the bed. Then quiet, Caleb keeping vigil while Lila tried to sleep. Elena stood and walked to her own room. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, exhausted but unsure if she could sleep. Through the thin walls, she could hear Caleb's voice, low and steady, telling Lila about the mountains, about the deer that came to drink from the stream at dawn, about the stars you could see from the porch when the sky was clear. Just talking, filling the silence, giving a frightened child something to focus on besides her fear. Elena closed her eyes and tried not to think about Annie, about the last night she'd put her to bed, read her a story, tucked her in safely, about how none of that had mattered the next day when Elena had looked away for 5 minutes and a child had drowned. But the memory came anyway, sharp and unforgiving. Annie's face when they pulled her from the pond, the way her small body had felt so heavy and so light at the same time, the screaming of her mother, arriving too late to do anything but witness the aftermath. Elena pressed her face into the pillow and tried to breathe through the panic rising in her chest. She couldn't do this. She couldn't be responsible for another child. She was going to fail again, and this time there would be no excuse, no accident to blame. This time she was walking into it with her eyes open, knowing exactly how much damage she could do. But then she heard Lila's voice through the wall, asking Caleb a question about the stars. Heard Caleb's careful answer, trying so hard to get it right. 2 broken people, trying to build something that wouldn't break a child further. Maybe that was all they could do. Try. Fail. Try again. Elena pulled Annie's photograph from the bedside drawer and held it in the darkness. "Help me not fail this one," she whispered. "Please." The photograph didn't answer, because the dead never did. But Elena held it anyway until her breathing slowed and sleep finally dragged her under. Elena woke to the sound of someone moving in the kitchen. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. The room was unfamiliar, the light wrong, the sounds all different from the ones she'd grown used to above the general store. Then memory crashed back. The cabin. The mountain. Lila. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Caleb at the stove, frying eggs in a cast-iron pan. He glanced up when he heard her door open. "Coffee's ready," he said, gesturing to the pot on the table. "Thank you." Elena poured herself a cup and wrapped her hands around it, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "How long have you been up?" "Couple hours. Had to check the trap lines before the day gets away from me." "Did you sleep at all?" "Some." The way he said it made clear it hadn't been enough. Elena looked toward Lila's room. The door was still cracked open, just as they'd left it. "Is she still asleep? I checked on her about an hour ago." They fell into silence, the kind that happens between people who don't know each other well enough for easy conversation. Caleb plated the eggs and set them on the table with bread left over from the night before. "You don't have to cook for me," Elena said. "Someone's got to eat. Might as well make enough for everyone." "I can take over meals if you want. That's usually women's work anyway." Caleb looked at her with something that might have been amusement. "I've been cooking for myself for 7 years. Don't need rescuing from it now." "Fair enough." They ate in continued silence until Lila's door creaked open. The girl appeared in the doorway wearing the same dress from yesterday, her hair a tangled mess around her face. She held Rosie under one arm and looked at them with sleepy, wary eyes. "Good morning," Elena said. "Are you hungry?" Lila nodded, but didn't move closer. "Come sit," Caleb said, pulling out a chair. "I'll fix you a plate." The girl approached slowly and climbed into the chair. Caleb set eggs and bread in front of her, and she ate with the same careful attention as the night before, like she was waiting for someone to snatch the food away. Elena watched her and felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on her shoulders. This small, damaged child was depending on them now. On two people who barely knew how to take care of themselves, let alone someone else. After breakfast, Caleb said, "I need to go into town. Get some supplies we'll need for winter. Both of you should come." "Why?" Lila asked quietly. "Because you need warmer clothes. What you've got won't be enough when the snow comes." "I don't want to go to town." Caleb paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "Why not?" "People stare." The words were small but certain, and Elena understood immediately. A child who'd lost both parents, who'd been handed off to strangers, who was now living with a father she'd never met. Of course people would stare, would whisper, would ask invasive questions disguised as concern. "They do," Elena said before Caleb could offer false reassurance. "People are nosy, especially in small towns. They'll want to know everything about you, and they'll pretend it's because they care, but really, they just like having something to talk about." Lila looked at her with those two old eyes. "So I have to let them?" "No. You don't have to tell them anything. You can ignore them, or tell them it's none of their business, or let me do the talking, your choice." "What would you tell them?" "The truth. That you're Caleb's daughter, that you've had a hard few months, and that you're settling in. Nothing more." Lila considered this. "What if they ask about you? Why you married him so fast?" Elena glanced at Caleb, who was listening intently. "I'd tell them we had our reasons, and those reasons aren't their concern." "Will that make them mad?" "Probably. But their feelings aren't your responsibility." Something in Lila's expression shifted, a small unclenching, like she'd been given permission to stop trying to make everyone comfortable. "Okay," she said, "I'll go." The ride to Iron Hollow took just as long in daylight as it had the evening before, though the scenery looked different in the morning sun. Elena could see the full scope of the mountains now, the way the trees clustered thick in the valleys and thinned out near the peaks. Hawks circled overhead, and once Caleb pointed out a deer watching them from the tree line. Lila sat in the back again, but this time she didn't clutch her carpet bag. Instead, she watched the landscape pass with quiet attention, occasionally asking Caleb questions about what she was seeing. "What's that bird?" "Red-tailed hawk. You can tell by the tail feathers." "Why's the water white there?" Rapids. The stream drops fast over rocks, churns up the water. Are there fish? Trout. I'll teach you to catch them when the weather warms up. Simple exchanges, careful and measured, but they were something. A father and daughter learning each other one question at a time. When they reached town, Caleb pulled the wagon up in front of Patterson's Dry Goods, a larger, more established store than Elena's had been. Mrs. Patterson stood behind the counter, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who missed nothing. Her eyebrows rose when she saw the three of them walk in together. "Well," she said, "heard you got married, Elena. Didn't believe it until now." "Believe it," Elena said evenly. Mrs. Patterson's gaze shifted to Lila, then to Caleb. "And this must be the girl, Mary's daughter." "Lila," Caleb said. "Her name is Lila." "Of course." Mrs. Patterson came around the counter, leaning down to peer at Lila with the kind of invasive curiosity that people mistake for kindness. Poor thing, losing both parents so young. "How are you holding up, dear?" Lila stepped closer to Elena and didn't answer. "She's managing," Elena said, her voice carrying a warning edge. "We need winter clothes, coat, boots, gloves, a few dresses if you have them in her size." Mrs. Patterson straightened, clearly disappointed at being denied the emotional confession she'd been angling for. "I have some things that might work. Let me look." She bustled off to the back room and Caleb leaned close to Elena. That was harsh. She was treating Lila like a tragedy instead of a person. Someone needed to stop her. "Fair point." Mrs. Patterson returned with an armful of clothing. "Try these on, sweetheart. The changing screen's in the corner." Lila looked at Elena, uncertain. "I'll come with you," Elena said. They went behind the screen together and Elena helped Lila try on various coats and dresses. Most were too big or too small, but eventually they found a serviceable wool coat that fit reasonably well, along with a pair of sturdy boots and two dresses that could be hemmed. When they emerged, Mrs. Patterson had laid out gloves and stockings on the counter. "These should work. Anything else you need?" "We're fine," Caleb said, pulling money from his pocket. "And how are you two settling into married life?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Must be quite an adjustment, going from strangers to a family overnight." "We're managing," Elena said, using the same phrase she'd applied to Lila. "I'm sure. Though I have to say, when I heard the news, I was surprised. Never thought of you as the marrying type, Elena. Always seemed so self-sufficient." "Things change." "They certainly do." Mrs. Patterson wrapped the clothes in brown paper and tied them with string. "Will we be seeing you at the church social next month? Everyone would love to meet your new family properly." "We'll see," Caleb said, clearly wanting to end the conversation. They left the store with their packages, and Lila immediately said, "I don't like her." "Neither do I," Elena agreed. "She talks too much and says nothing useful." "That's most people, unfortunately." Caleb loaded the packages into the wagon, then paused. "There's one more stop I need to make. Won't take long." He led them down the street to a small office with social services painted on the window. Elena's stomach tightened. "Why are we here?" Lila asked, her voice going small again. "Just checking in," Caleb said, "letting Mrs. Chen know you arrived safely." The door opened before they reached it, and a woman stepped out, Chinese, middle-aged, wearing a practical gray dress and carrying a leather satchel. She stopped when she saw them. "Mr. Mercer, I wasn't expecting you until next week. Wanted to come by sooner, let you know everything went smoothly." Mrs. Chen's eyes moved to Elena, then to Lila. "And this is?" "My wife, Elena. We married 2 days ago." "I see." Mrs. Chen's expression was neutral, giving nothing away. "That was fortunate timing." "It was necessary timing," Elena said. "Caleb told me about the situation with Lila, and I agreed to help." "Help?" Mrs. Chen repeated the word like she was testing its weight. "That's an interesting way to describe marriage." "It's an honest way." They stared at each other for a moment, two women sizing each other up. Mrs. Chen broke first, crouching down to Lila's level. "Hello, Lila. I'm Mrs. Chen. I came to see you at your aunt's house, remember?" Lila nodded, but said nothing. "How are you settling in at your father's cabin?" "Fine." "Just fine?" Lila's hand found Elena's. "It's okay. Better than Aunt Vera's." "Why is that?" "She didn't want me there. These people do." The bluntness of it seemed to catch Mrs. Chen off guard. She glanced up at Elena, who kept her expression carefully neutral. "I'm glad to hear that," Mrs. Chen said finally. "I'll be coming to visit in a few weeks to see how things are going. Make sure you're adjusting well, Caleb. I'll need to see the living arrangements. Make sure they're suitable for a child." "Understood. The cabin's ready whenever you want to come. I'll send word." She turned to leave, then paused. "Mr. Mercer, a word of advice. The timing of your marriage raises questions. Be prepared to answer them thoroughly when I visit." "We will," Elena said before Caleb could respond. Mrs. Chen nodded once and walked away, her heels clicking on the wooden sidewalk. "She doesn't believe us," Caleb said quietly. "She doesn't have to believe us. She just has to see that Lila's safe and cared for." "And if she doesn't think that's enough?" Elena looked down at Lila, who was still holding her hand. "Then we'll deal with it when it happens." They climbed back into the wagon and headed out of town. The ride back was quieter, all three of them processing the encounter with Mrs. Chen in their own ways. Halfway up the mountain, Lila spoke up from the back. "Elena?" "Yes?" "Do you think she'll take me away?" Elena glanced at Caleb, who kept his eyes on the road. "I think she's trying to make sure you're in a good place. That's her job." "But what if she decides I'm not?" "Then we'll fight to keep you here. And if that doesn't work, we'll find another way." "What other way?" "I don't know yet. But giving up isn't an option." Lila was quiet for a moment. "Why do you care? You said you might leave after 6 months anyway." It was a fair question, and Elena didn't have a good answer. Why did she care? This was supposed to be a transaction, a way to escape her past and start fresh somewhere new. Lila wasn't supposed to matter beyond that. But somewhere between the train station and this moment, something had shifted. The girl had stopped being just a means to an end and had become a person, small and damaged and deserving of better than what life had given her so far. "Because you're here now," Elena said finally. "And while you're here, you're my responsibility. That matters to me. Even though you didn't choose me, even though—" Lila seemed to accept this. She settled back against the blankets and didn't ask anything else. When they reached the cabin, Caleb unloaded the supplies while Elena helped Lila bring her new clothes inside. They hung the coat on a peg by the door and put the dresses in the small chest in Lila's room. "Do you want to try on the boots again?" Elena asked. "Make sure they still fit right?" Lila shook her head. "Can I go outside?" "Of course. Stay where we can see you, though." The girl grabbed Rosie and headed out to the porch. Through the window, Elena watched her sit on the steps and arrange the doll carefully beside her, then stare out at the trees. Caleb came up beside Elena, following her gaze. "She's so quiet. She's processing everything that's happened, everything that's changing. It's a lot for a child. Hell, it's a lot for an adult." "That too." They stood there together, watching Lila through the window, like she was something fragile that might break if they looked away. "I don't know what I'm doing," Caleb said quietly. "With her. With any of this. You keep saying that." "Because it's true." "Then stop saying it and start doing it anyway." Elena turned to face him. "You don't need to know what you're doing. You just need to show up and try. That's more than a lot of children get." "Is that what you did? With the children you cared for?" Elena's jaw tightened. "I thought I did. Turned out trying wasn't enough. You're still here, though. Still trying with Lila. Because I owe it to the one I failed." Caleb studied her face. "That's not a good reason." "It's the only reason I have." He opened his mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he walked to the door and called out to Lila. "You want to help me feed the chickens?" Lila looked up, surprised. "You have chickens?" "6 of them. They're out back in the coop." "Okay." Elena watched from the doorway as Caleb led Lila around to the back of the cabin. She could hear his voice explaining how to scatter the feed, warning her about the rooster who got territorial, teaching her the names he'd given each bird. It was awkward and halting, this attempt at connection, but it was genuine. He was trying, just like Elena had told him to. She went inside and started going through the supplies they'd bought. Flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans. Practical things that would get them through winter. She organized them on the shelves with the kind of methodical attention that kept her mind busy and her thoughts quiet. But her hand stilled when she found the small bag of peppermint sticks tucked at the bottom of one parcel. She hadn't seen Caleb buy them, but he must have. A small thing, a sweet thing, meant for a child. Elena set them on the shelf where Lila would see them and felt something twist in her chest. This man who claimed he didn't know what he was doing had still thought to buy candy for his daughter. That evening, after they'd eaten and Lila had gone to bed, Elena and Caleb sat by the fire again. It was becoming a routine already, this quiet time after the day ended, when they could exist in the same space without the weight of pretending. "Mrs. Chen is going to be a problem," Caleb said. "Maybe. She knows this isn't a real marriage. She suspects it isn't. That's different from knowing. How do we convince her otherwise?" Elena considered this. "We don't. We convince her that whether our marriage is conventional or not, Lila is safe and well cared for. That's what she actually cares about." "You think that'll be enough?" "It has to be, because we can't fake what we don't have." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "What if I told you something?" "What?" "I'm glad you're here. Not just because of Lila or the arrangement or any of that, but because this cabin's been empty for 7 years and it turns out I forgot what it's like to have someone else around, to not be alone all the time." Elena didn't know what to say to that. The confession was too raw, too honest, and it made her uncomfortable in ways she couldn't articulate. "Don't get used to it," she said finally. "I'm not staying." "I know. You've made that clear. I just don't want you to start thinking this is something it's not." "I'm not." He looked at her directly. "But I can still appreciate what it is while it lasts." Elena felt something shift between them. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. Two lonely people who'd found themselves accidentally sharing space, accidentally building something that looked almost like a life. It was dangerous. She couldn't let herself care too much, couldn't let this become real, because real things could be lost. And she'd lost enough already. "I'm going to bed," she said, standing abruptly. "Elena, good night, Caleb." She retreated to her room and closed the door, leaning against it in the darkness. Her heart was beating too fast, and she couldn't quite catch her breath. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to start feeling things. For Lila, for Caleb, for this strange makeshift family they were pretending to be. But the feelings were there anyway, creeping in despite her best efforts to keep them out. And Elena didn't know how to stop them without destroying what little stability they'd managed to create. She pulled Annie's photograph from the drawer again and stared at it in the moonlight coming through the window. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered. "I'm trying to help, but I'm scared I'm just going to ruin everything again." The photograph didn't answer. It never did. But holding it made Elena feel less alone, less like she was navigating this impossible situation without any anchor. Eventually she put it away and climbed into bed. Sleep came slowly, interrupted by the sound of Caleb moving around in the loft above her and the occasional creak from Lila's room next door. Two broken adults and one damaged child, all trying to survive under the same roof. It shouldn't work. By every logical measure, it was doomed to fail. But for now, for tonight, they were all still here, still trying. That would have to be enough. The next morning brought rain, cold and persistent, drumming on the cabin roof and turning the world outside gray and sodden. Lila sat at the window, watching the water run down the glass, while Elena worked on hemming the new dresses they'd bought. "Do you know how to sew?" Elena asked. Lila shook her head. "Would you like to learn?" The girl considered this. "Will it be hard?" "At first, but most things worth learning are hard at first." Lila came over and sat beside her. Elena showed her how to thread a needle, how to make small, even stitches, how to tie off the thread when you reach the end. Lila's first attempts were clumsy, the stitches wandering and uneven, but she didn't give up. "My mama used to sew," she said quietly. "She made me a dress for my birthday last year, blue with white flowers." "That sounds beautiful." "It was, but it got ruined when—" She trailed off, not finishing the sentence. Elena didn't push. "Do you miss her?" "Yes, but sometimes I can't remember her face anymore. Like it's getting blurry." "That's normal. It doesn't mean you're forgetting her. It just means memory works differently than we want it to." Lila was quiet, focused on her stitching. Then she said, "Do you have anyone you can't remember anymore?" Elena thought of Annie. of the way she'd tried so hard to keep every detail clear, the exact shade of her hair, the sound of her laugh, the way she said Elena's name, and how some of those details had faded anyway despite her best efforts. "Yes," she said. "Someone I cared about very much." "Did they die?" "Yes." "Was it your fault?" The question was so direct, so unflinchingly honest, that Elena almost lied. But she'd promised Lila truth, and truth was what she'd give. "Yes," she said. "It was." Lila looked up from her sewing. "Do you think about them every day?" "Every day." "Does it get easier?" "No, but you get stronger at carrying it." Lila nodded, like this made perfect sense to her. "I think about Mama and Thomas every day too. Sometimes I'm scared I'll forget them completely." "You won't. Not the important parts. The way they made you feel, the things they taught you, those stay." "How do you know?" "Because I still carry the person I lost, even though she's been gone for 3 years. She's part of me now, changed me. The people we love don't really leave, even when they die. They just shift, become part of how we see the world." Lila processed this with her usual careful attention. "I don't want to forget Mama's face." "Then we'll make sure you don't." Elena stood and went to her room, returning with a small journal and a pencil. "Here, draw what you remember. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just yours." Lila took the journal hesitantly. "I'm not good at drawing." "Doesn't matter. This is just for you." The girl opened to the first page and started sketching. Her lines were uncertain, childish, but she worked with fierce concentration. After a while, she held it up. "That's her, kind of." Elena looked at the simple drawing, a woman's face with long hair and a smile. Basic, but recognizable as someone Lila loved. "It's beautiful," Elena said. "Really?" "Really." Lila looked at the drawing for a long moment, then closed the journal and held it against her chest. "Thank you." "You're welcome." The rain continued through the afternoon. Caleb worked outside anyway, coming in periodically dripping wet to check on them before heading back out. By evening, he was soaked through and shivering. "You need to change," Elena said. "You'll catch your death." "I'm fine." "You're freezing. Go change. I'll make dinner." He looked like he might argue, then nodded and climbed the ladder to the loft. Elena heard him moving around up there, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of clothing. She started a stew with the vegetables and venison from their stores, letting it simmer while she set the table. Lila helped without being asked, placing the bowls and spoons carefully. When Caleb came back down, his hair was damp and he'd changed into dry clothes. He sat at the table and Elena ladled stew into his bowl. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "Someone has to feed us. You were busy drowning in the rain. I was checking the traps. In this weather, animals don't care about weather. Neither can I." They ate together, the three of them, and Elena noticed how Lila had started sitting a little closer, relaxing a little more. The girl still didn't talk much, but her silence felt less defensive now, more contemplative than protective. After dinner, Lila asked if she could have one of the peppermint sticks. "You found those, did you?" Caleb said. "They're on the shelf." "They're for you. You can have one whenever you want." Lila carefully unwrapped one and sucked on it while she sat by the fire with her journal, drawing more pictures. Elena washed the dishes while Caleb dried them, and the domesticity of it all felt strange and almost comfortable. "She's doing better," Caleb said quietly. "Don't you think?" "It's been 3 days. Don't read too much into it." "Still, she's talking more, asking questions." "That's good. But she'll have bad days too, days where she regresses, where the grief hits her all at once. You need to be ready for that." "I will be." Elena handed him the last plate. "You're trying hard. I'll give you that." "Is it enough?" "I don't know yet." He absorbed this without offense. "Fair enough." That night, Lila had another nightmare. Elena woke to the sound of crying and was out of bed before she'd fully registered what she was doing. She knocked on Lila's door and pushed it open. The girl was sitting up in bed, Rosie clutched in her arms, tears streaming down her face. "Hey," Elena said softly. "Bad dream?" Lila nodded, hiccuping. Elena sat on the edge of the bed. "Want to talk about it?" "I dreamed I was drowning in the pond behind Aunt Vera's house, and nobody came to help me." Elena's chest tightened. Drowning, of course. That sounds terrifying. I kept calling for Mama, but she wasn't there, and Thomas wasn't there. Nobody was there. But you're here now, in your room, safe. I know, but in the dream I wasn't. Elena reached out slowly, giving Lila time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, Elena gently brushed the hair back from her face. Dreams feel real when you're in them, but they're not. This is real. This room, this bed, me sitting here, that's what's real. Lila's breathing started to slow. Will you stay? Yes. Elena stayed on the edge of the bed, one hand resting lightly on Lila's shoulder, while the girl's breathing gradually evened out. Eventually, Lila's eyes drifted closed, and she slipped back into sleep. Elena should have left then, should have gone back to her own room, maintained the boundaries she'd set, but she stayed, sat there in the darkness, listening to Lila breathe, watching over this child who'd already lost so much. When she finally returned to her room, she found Caleb sitting on the floor outside his loft ladder, clearly having climbed down when he heard the commotion. Is she okay? He whispered. Nightmare. She's asleep now. Thank you for going to her. It's fine. It's not fine. It's more than I could do. I wouldn't have known what to say. You would have figured it out. Maybe. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes in the dim light. Or maybe I would have made it worse. Elena sat down on the floor beside him, both of them too tired to go back to their respective beds just yet. You can't think like that, she said. Second-guessing every move before you make it. Sometimes you just have to act and deal with the consequences later. That's what got me into this mess in the first place. What do you mean? Caleb leaned his head back against the wall. The mine accident. I was on a crew that was supposed to wait for the engineer to check the support beams before we went deeper. But the foreman was pushing us to meet quota, and I didn't speak up. Didn't say what I knew, that those beams weren't stable, that we were moving too fast. What happened? What always happens when you ignore safety for speed. The ceiling came down. 12 men died because nobody wanted to slow down long enough to do it right. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I knew better, and I kept my mouth shut. Elena thought about Annie, about knowing she should have been watching, should have stayed focused, should have put the child first instead of getting distracted by her own problems. We all have things we wish we'd done differently, she said, but beating yourself up about them doesn't change anything. Then what does? Not making the same mistake twice. They sat in silence for a while, two people bound by guilt and trying to find their way through it. Elena? Yeah? Why did you really agree to this? Not the money, the real reason. She could have lied, should have probably, but sitting there in the darkness, both of them raw and exhausted, the truth felt easier. Because I failed a child once, and I've been running from it ever since. And when you showed up asking for help with Lila, I thought maybe if I could get this right, it would make up for what I got wrong before. Does it work like that? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Caleb was quiet for a moment, then he said, We're quite a pair, aren't we? Completely broken. Trying anyway, Elena agreed. She stood up, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how intimate this conversation had become. Get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow's another day of pretending we know what we're doing. Good night, Elena. Good night. She went to her room and closed the door, but sleep didn't come for a long time. She lay in bed thinking about Caleb's confession, about the weight he carried, about how alike they were in all the ways that mattered. Two people trying to atone for past failures by not failing this time. It shouldn't be enough, probably wasn't, but it was all they had. The days began to blur together in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Caleb left early each morning to check his trap lines, returning by mid-morning with whatever the mountain had offered. Rabbits, occasionally a deer, once a fox with a pelt so beautiful that Lila had stared at it for a full minute before asking if they had to sell it. Elena fell into the work of running a household, though it chafed against everything she'd told herself about this arrangement being temporary. She cooked meals, mended clothes, taught Lila to knead bread and hang laundry on the line strung between two pines behind the cabin. The girl learned quickly, her small hands becoming more confident with each task. But it was the quiet moments that surprised Elena most. Lila reading aloud from the single book she'd brought with her, a battered copy of fairy tales, while Elena worked on darning socks. Caleb teaching Lila to identify animal tracks in the mud near the stream, his voice patient as he explained the difference between deer and elk. The three of them sitting by the fire after supper, not talking, just existing in the same space without it feeling forced. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. The letter arrived on a gray morning when the first snow had started to dust the peaks above them. Caleb came back from town with supplies and a sealed envelope bearing official letterhead. "Mrs. Chen," he said, handing it to Elena. "She's coming tomorrow." Elena's stomach dropped. She'd known this was coming, had been preparing for it, but the reality of it still hit hard. Tomorrow, everything they'd built would be examined, judged, potentially torn apart. She opened the letter and scanned it quickly. Professional, formal, giving them exactly 12 hours' notice. Deliberate, Elena thought. Mrs. Chen wanted to see them as they really were, not after they'd had time to prepare. "What does it say?" Lila asked from the table, where she'd been practicing her letters. "Mrs. Chen is coming to visit tomorrow to see how you're settling in." Lila's face went carefully blank. "Will she take me away?" "Not if we have anything to say about it," Caleb said, his voice firm. But Elena saw the fear in his eyes and knew he was just as terrified as the girl. That night, after Lila had gone to bed, Elena and Caleb sat by the fire and tried to prepare for questions they couldn't predict. "She's going to ask why we got married so fast," Caleb said. "So we tell her the truth. You needed help? I agreed to provide it." "That sounds cold." "It is cold, but it's honest, and she'll respect that more than some romantic story we make up." Caleb rubbed his face with both hands. "What if she asks if we love each other?" "We tell her that love takes time, and we're building something based on respect and shared goals instead." "Does that sound convincing to you?" "It sounds real, which is better than convincing." He looked at her across the firelight. "Do you think we've done enough? For Lila?" Elena thought about the past 3 weeks. The way Lila had started smiling occasionally, small and tentative but genuine. The way she'd stopped flinching every time someone moved too quickly near her. The way she'd started calling Caleb Papa instead of just Caleb, though she still stumbled over the word like it didn't quite fit in her mouth yet. "I think we've done what we could," Elena said. "Whether it's enough is up to Mrs. Chen. I hate that someone else gets to decide if my daughter stays with me." "I know, but that's how it works when the state thinks you can't be trusted." "Can I be trusted?" The question was raw, vulnerable. "Tell me honestly. If you were Mrs. Chen, would you let Lila stay here?" Elena looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd rebuilt a cabin to make space for a child he'd never met, who woke up before dawn every morning to provide for them, who tried so hard to say the right thing to Lila, even when he had no idea what the right thing was. "Yes," she said. "You're not perfect. You're awkward and uncertain, and you second-guess yourself constantly. But you show up. Every day you show up and try. That's more than a lot of fathers do. Even the ones who didn't abandon their children without knowing it. Especially those, because you can't change what you didn't know. All you can do is deal with what's in front of you now." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Thank you for being here, for helping with this. Don't thank me yet. Wait until we see if it actually works. Even if it doesn't, I'm still grateful." Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Just stared into the fire and tried not to think about how much she'd started to care whether this makeshift family survived. Mrs. Chen arrived precisely at 10 the next morning, stepping down from a hired wagon with her leather satchel and a notebook already in hand. She wore the same practical gray dress, her hair pinned back severely, her expression giving away nothing. "Mr. Mercer? Mrs. Mercer." She nodded to each of them in turn. "Thank you for making time to meet with me." "Of course," Caleb said, though they'd had no choice in the matter. "May I come in?" They led her into the cabin, and Elena watched as Mrs. Chen's eyes swept the space, cataloging every detail. The clean floors, the organized shelves, the small touches that made it a home rather than just shelter, curtains on the windows, a vase with pine branches on the table, Lila's drawings pinned to the wall near her bedroom door. "Where is Lila?" Mrs. Chen asked. "In her room," Elena said. "Reading. Should I get her?" "In a moment. First, I'd like to speak with the two of you alone." They sat at the table, Mrs. Chen on one side, Caleb and Elena on the other. Mrs. Chen opened her notebook and pulled out a pen. I'll be direct, she said. Your marriage raises significant questions. You went from strangers to husband and wife in less than 24 hours, coincidentally right before Lila's arrival. That pattern is consistent with arrangements made purely for legal convenience rather than genuine commitment. It was convenient, Elena said. We're not denying that. Mrs. Chen's eyebrow rose slightly. Most couples in your situation would try to convince me otherwise. Most couples in our situation would be lying. We'd rather not. I see. So you're admitting this is a marriage of convenience? We're admitting it started as one, Caleb said carefully. But things are more complicated than that now. How so? Elena and Caleb looked at each other, and Elena realized they hadn't actually discussed this part. What their relationship was now, 3 weeks in. What they'd become to each other beyond the original transaction. We're partners, Elena said finally. We're both invested in making sure Lila has a stable home, and we've developed respect for each other in the process. Respect? Mrs. Chen wrote something in her notebook. Not love? Love takes time, Elena said, echoing what she'd told Caleb the night before. We're building something real, but we're not going to lie and say it's a traditional marriage. And you think that's sufficient for raising a child? I think it's better than a lot of traditional marriages where the parents hate each other but stay together anyway. Elena leaned forward. Mrs. Chen, I'm not going to pretend this is perfect, but Lila is fed, clothed, warm, and safe. She's learning to read better. She's starting to smile again. She has 2 adults who are committed to her well-being. That's more than she had a month ago. Mrs. Chen's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. You make a compelling argument, Mrs. Mercer, but my job isn't to evaluate your debating skills. It's to evaluate whether this environment is truly in Lila's best interest. Then ask her, Caleb said. Don't take our word for it. Talk to Lila yourself. Mrs. Chen nodded. I intend to, but first I need to see her living space. They showed her Lila's room. Mrs. Chen examined everything, the bed, the chest, the small table with books stacked neatly on it. She ran her finger along the painted flowers on the wall. Who did this? She asked. I did, Caleb said, before she arrived. Wanted her to have something cheerful to look at. Mrs. Chen made another note. And her clothes? Are they adequate for winter? We bought her a new coat and boots 2 weeks ago, Elena said. She's growing fast, so we'll need to get more soon, but she's covered for now. Medical care? Doc Harrison came through last week on his rounds. Checked her over, said she's healthy, but underweight. We're working on that. Mrs. Chen walked to the window and looked out at the mountain view. It's very isolated here. It is, Caleb agreed, but Lila goes to town with us twice a week. She's enrolled at the schoolhouse, starts after the new year. That's 2 months away. I've been teaching her at home in the meantime, Elena said. Reading, writing, arithmetic, she's bright. She'll catch up quickly. Mrs. Chen turned from the window. I'd like to speak with Lila now. Alone, if you don't mind. Elena's stomach twisted, but she nodded. I'll get her. She went to Lila's room and knocked softly. The girl looked up from her book and Elena saw the fear in her eyes. Mrs. Chen wants to talk to you, Elena said gently. In your room, just you and her. Will you stay? She asked to speak with you alone, but Caleb and I will be right outside if you need us. Lila set down her book and stood up, her hands twisting together nervously. What if I say the wrong thing? There's no wrong thing. Just tell her the truth about how you feel, about whether you're happy here. Am I allowed to be happy here, even though Mama and Thomas are gone? The question broke Elena's heart. Yes, sweetheart, you're allowed to be happy. That doesn't mean you're forgetting them or betraying them. It just means you're healing. Lila absorbed this, then nodded. Okay, I'll talk to her. Elena led her to the main room where Mrs. Chen waited. The social worker smiled at Lila, a genuine smile that softened her severe features. Hello, Lila. Do you remember me? Yes, ma'am. I'd like to talk with you for a few minutes. Just us. Is that all right? Lila glanced at Elena, who gave her an encouraging nod. Then she said, Yes, ma'am. Elena and Caleb retreated to the porch, closing the door behind them. The morning was cold, the air sharp with the promise of more snow. They stood side by side, not talking, just waiting. What do you think she's asking her? Caleb said after a while. whether she feels safe, whether we're treating her well, whether she wants to stay. And what do you think Lila will say? I don't know. She's honest to a fault. She'll tell Mrs. Chen exactly what she thinks. That's what I'm afraid of. They waited for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. When the door finally opened, Mrs. Chen emerged alone. She'd like you to come back in, she said. Both of you. They followed her inside. Lila was sitting at the table, her hands folded in front of her, looking small and serious. Mrs. Chen sat down across from her and gestured for Elena and Caleb to join them. When they were all seated, she opened her notebook again. Lila has told me about her experience here so far, Mrs. Chen said. She's been quite forthcoming. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She tells me that you've been honest with her about the nature of your marriage, Mrs. Chen continued, that you've explained this began as an arrangement to allow her to stay with her father. That's true, Elena said. She also tells me that despite this unusual beginning, she feels safe here, that she has her own room, adequate food, and 2 adults who are patient with her grief. Mrs. Chen looked at Lila. Is that accurate? Lila nodded. Yes, ma'am. She's also expressed that she wishes to remain here rather than be placed in an institution or with another family. Mrs. Chen's gaze shifted to Caleb. She says, and I quote, Papa is trying really hard and Elena doesn't lie to me. Elena saw Caleb's throat work as he swallowed hard. However, Mrs. Chen said, and Elena's stomach dropped. There are still concerns. The isolated nature of this location, the unconventional marriage, the fact that both of you are, by your own admission, still learning how to be caregivers. We are learning, Elena said, but we're learning together and we're doing our best. Your best may not be sufficient. With respect, Mrs. Chen, what would be sufficient? Elena's voice was sharp now. A wealthy family in Denver who'd put her in a nice room and hire nannies to raise her? An institution where she'd be one child among dozens, all of them grieving, none of them getting the individual attention they need? What's the better option here? Mrs. Mercer, no. You want the truth? Here it is. Lila has lost everything, her mother, her father, the man who raised her, her home, her sense of security. She's 7 years old and she's already learned that the world is cruel and people leave. What she needs isn't perfection. She needs consistency. She needs people who show up every day and keep showing up even when it's hard. Elena's hands were shaking. Maybe Caleb and I aren't the ideal parents. Maybe our marriage is unconventional. Maybe this cabin is too isolated, but we're here. Every single day we're here, and we're not leaving. The room was silent. Mrs. Chen looked at Elena with an expression that was impossible to read. Then she turned to Caleb. And you, Mr. Mercer? Do you share your wife's conviction? Every word of it, Caleb said quietly. Lila is my daughter. I didn't know about her for 7 years, and I can't get those years back. But I'm not wasting any more time. She stays with me, with us. That's not negotiable. Mrs. Chen closed her notebook with a soft snap. I appreciate your passion, both of you, but passion alone doesn't make a suitable home. Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. However, Mrs. Chen continued, neither does it disqualify one. What I've seen here today is a child who is clean, fed, and articulate, who speaks fondly of both her caregivers despite their acknowledged imperfections, who has her own space and her own belongings, who is, by all observable measures, beginning to heal from significant trauma. She stood up, and they all stood with her. I am recommending that Lila remain in your custody, Mrs. Chen said, provisionally. Provisionally? Caleb repeated. I will return in 3 months for another evaluation. At that time, I will expect to see continued progress. Lila enrolled in school and attending regularly. Evidence that this household remains stable, and demonstration that both of you are committed to this arrangement for the long term, not just until the legal requirements are satisfied. We will be, Elena said. Mrs. Chen looked at her with those sharp, assessing eyes. I hope so, Mrs. Mercer, because that child has already lost too much. If you're going to leave after 6 months, as you've apparently told her, I suggest you reconsider. Children need permanence, not temporary solutions. The words hit like a slap. Elena opened her mouth to respond, but Mrs. Chen had already turned to Lila. You've been very brave today, she told the girl. Keep being honest about how you feel, And if anything changes, if you ever feel unsafe or unhappy, you can write to me. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Good. Mrs. Chen gathered her things and headed for the door. Caleb walked her out to the wagon, leaving Elena and Lila alone in the cabin. Lila looked up at her with those two old eyes. Did I do okay? You did perfectly. Elena crouched down to the girl's level. You told her the truth, and that's exactly what you should have done. She said you might leave after 6 months. That's what we agreed to at the beginning. You know that. But you said you'd be here. You promised. I promised I'd be here for 6 months. After that, you'll leave. Lila's voice was flat, just like everyone else. Lila, it's okay. I understand. You're only here because Papa needed help. Once he doesn't need help anymore, you'll go. Elena wanted to argue, to tell the girl it was more complicated than that. But the truth was, Lila was right. That had been the agreement. 6 months, then freedom. Elena had been planning for it, counting on it, building her escape route even as she built this temporary home. I don't know what's going to happen after 6 months, Elena said finally, but I know what's happening now. Right now I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere today or tomorrow or for a long time yet. Can that be enough? Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back stubbornly. I guess it has to be. She walked past Elena to her room and closed the door quietly behind her. Not a slam, which somehow made it worse. Just a quiet, resigned acceptance that adults made promises they didn't keep, and there was nothing a child could do about it. Elena stood there, feeling like she'd been gutted. She heard Caleb come back in, but couldn't bring herself to turn around. She said yes, Caleb said. We get to keep her. I know. Then why do you look like someone died? Because Lila just learned that I'm planning to leave. And now she's in there processing the fact that she's getting attached to someone who's already told her they're temporary. You didn't lie to her. You were honest from the start. That doesn't make it hurt less. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Are you? Planning to leave after 6 months? Elena finally turned to face him. That was the deal. Deals can change. Can they? I told you from the beginning what this was. A transaction. A temporary solution. You agreed to those terms. I did. But that was before... He stopped, seeming to struggle with what to say next. Before what? Before it started feeling like more than a transaction. Elena's chest tightened. Don't do this. Don't do what? Tell you that having you here matters? That Lila's getting attached to you, and so am I? You're not supposed to get attached. That wasn't part of the agreement. Since when do feelings follow agreements? Caleb's voice rose slightly. You think I planned this? You think I wanted to start caring about someone who's already planning her exit? Then maybe you should have been more careful. Maybe you should have been less effective at being exactly what we needed. The words hung between them, sharp and honest and impossible to take back. Elena grabbed her coat from the peg by the door. I need air. Elena, just let me go, please. She walked out into the cold without waiting for his response. Her breath came in quick, sharp gasps that had nothing to do with the altitude. She made it to the edge of the clearing before she had to stop, bracing herself against a tree while she tried to get herself under control. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to care. This was supposed to be simple. 6 months of pretending, then freedom. A chance to start over somewhere new, unencumbered by the past or by new attachments that would only lead to more failure. But somewhere along the way, it had stopped being simple. Lila had stopped being just a child she was helping and had become someone Elena actually cared about. Someone whose grief Elena understood because she carried her own. Someone who deserved better than another adult who would eventually leave. And Caleb, stern, damaged, trying so hard Caleb, had stopped being a stranger and had become someone she could talk to. Someone who understood guilt and failure because he carried those things too. Someone who made her feel less alone in her own brokenness. Elena pulled Annie's photograph from her pocket. She'd started carrying it with her everywhere again, a talisman against forgetting why she was really here. What am I supposed to do? She whispered to the image. I came here to make up for failing you, but now I'm setting myself up to fail someone else. If I stay, I'll eventually mess up and hurt them. If I leave, I hurt them anyway. There's no good option. The photograph offered no answers, just that frozen smile and those eyes that would never age. Elena heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Caleb approaching slowly, giving her space but coming anyway. "I'm sorry," he said, "for pushing, for making this harder than it needs to be." "You didn't make anything harder. This was always going to be hard." "Maybe, but I could have kept my mouth shut instead of putting pressure on you." Elena looked at him, this man who'd offered her an escape route and had somehow become an anchor instead. "Do you really want me to stay, after 6 months?" "Yes, but not if it's going to make you miserable. Not if you're just doing it out of obligation. I don't know what I want anymore." The admission felt like failure. "I came here thinking this would be temporary, a way to atone for Annie by helping Lila, then moving on with my life. But now it's real." "Yes, and real things can be lost. I've already lost one child I was supposed to protect. I don't know if I can survive losing another." Caleb stepped closer, and Elena could see the understanding in his eyes. "So you're planning to leave before you can get hurt?" "Before I can hurt anyone else, there's a difference." "Is there?" "Because from where I'm standing, you running away hurts everyone involved. You, me, Lila. The only difference is you get to control the timing." The truth of it stung. Elena turned away, staring out at the mountains that had become familiar over the past weeks. "I don't trust myself," she said quietly. "Every time I think I'm doing okay, every time I start to believe I can handle this, I remember Annie's face when they pulled her from that pond. I remember the weight of her in my arms. I remember knowing that I'd killed her by being careless." "You didn't kill her." "I might as well have. And what happens when I get careless again? When I look away at the wrong moment, or make the wrong decision, or fail in some other way I can't predict? What happens to Lila then?" "The same thing that happens when I make a mistake. We deal with it. We apologize, we fix what we can, and we keep going." "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple, it's terrifying. But staying terrified and alone isn't better." Elena closed her eyes. Mrs. Chen was right. Lila needs permanence, not someone who's planning to leave. "So don't leave." "It's not that easy." "Why not?" "Because—" Elena stopped, struggling to articulate the fear that had been driving her for 3 years. "Because I don't know how to be what she needs. I don't know how to be what you need. I barely know how to be what I need." "None of us know what we're doing," Caleb said. "We're all just making it up as we go and hoping it's enough." "That's not very reassuring." "It's honest." Elena laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You and your honesty. You started it with Lila, telling her the truth instead of pretty lies. And look where that got us. A 7-year-old who's already bracing for me to abandon her. Because you told her you would. You can tell her something different now." Elena turned to face him fully. "And what if I mess up? What if I can't be what she needs long term? Then we'll deal with it together. But at least give yourself the chance to try beyond 6 months. Don't make the decision based on fear." The argument was sound. Elena knew it was sound. But fear was a powerful thing, and hers had been running her life for 3 years. "I need time," she said finally, "to think about this. To figure out what I actually want instead of what I think I should want." "Okay, take the time you need." "Thank you." They stood there in the cold, two broken people trying to figure out how to build something that wouldn't break a child further. It shouldn't work. By every logical measure, they were doomed to fail. But they hadn't failed yet. That had to count for something. When they went back inside, Lila was sitting at the table with her journal, drawing. She looked up when they entered, her eyes wary. "Are you mad at each other?" she asked. "No," Elena said. "Just talking about difficult things." "About me?" "About all of us. About what happens next." Lila set down her pencil. "Are you leaving?" Elena took a breath and crossed to kneel beside Lila's chair. "I don't know yet. I know that's not the answer you want, but it's the honest one. What I do know is that I'm here right now, and I care about what happens to you. That hasn't changed. But it might change later. It might, or it might not. But I promise I won't leave without talking to you first, without making sure you understand why and giving you time to prepare. Okay?" Lila looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay." It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't trust. Not fully. But it was acceptance that this was the best Elena could offer right now. That night, after Lila had gone to bed, Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling. Through the thin walls, she could hear Caleb moving around in the loft above her, settling in for the night, probably wrestling with the same question she was. Stay or go? Risk attachment or protect herself? Choose fear or choose hope? The choice should have been obvious. She'd spent 3 years running from anything that could hurt her. Why stop now? But then she thought about Lila's face when she laughed at something silly, about the way the girl had started to relax, to be a child again instead of a tiny adult carrying grief too heavy for her size, about how much Lila had already lost and how much more she stood to lose if Elena walked away. And she thought about Caleb, awkward and earnest, trying so hard to be a father to a daughter he'd never known he had, about the way he'd built a room for her before she arrived, about the peppermint sticks and the painted flowers, and all the small ways he showed he cared, even when he didn't know how to say it, about how maybe, possibly, she'd started to care too. Not just about atoning for Annie, but about these specific people in this specific place. That was the terrifying part. It was one thing to care in the abstract, to help because it was the right thing to do. It was another thing entirely to care specifically, personally, in a way that meant their pain would be her pain and their loss would be her loss. But maybe that's what real connection was. Not the safe distance she'd maintained for 3 years, but the risky closeness of actually letting people in. Elena pulled out Annie's photograph one more time, studying the little girl's face in the moonlight. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm scared I'll fail them like I failed you, but I'm also scared of running away again, of spending the rest of my life alone because I'm too afraid to try." She waited, as if the photograph might answer, as if Annie might somehow tell her what to do, but the only voice she heard was her own, quiet and uncertain in the darkness. "I don't know if I can stay, but maybe I can stop planning to leave. Maybe that's enough for now." It wasn't a decision, not really, just a small shift in perspective, but it was something. Elena tucked the photograph away and closed her eyes, letting sleep pull her under while outside the first real snow of the season began to fall, blanketing the mountain in white silence. The snow kept falling through the night and into the next morning, transforming the mountain into something unfamiliar. Elena woke to a world muffled in white, the silence so complete it felt like the cabin had been sealed off from everything else that existed. She dressed quickly, adding an extra layer against the cold, and emerged to find Caleb already stoking the fire. He looked up when he heard her door open. "Storm came in harder than expected," he said. "We're probably snowed in for a few days." "How much fell?" 2 feet, maybe more, and it's still coming down." Elena walked to the window and looked out at the landscape erased by snow. The path to town had disappeared entirely. Even the barn was barely visible through the white curtain. "Have you checked on the animals?" "Just got back. They're fine. Got enough feed to last a week if we need it." Lila's door opened and the girl shuffled out, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She stopped when she saw the window. "It snowed," she said, her voice holding something Elena hadn't heard before. "Wonder." "All night," Caleb said. Lila pressed her face against the glass. "Can I go out in it?" "After breakfast, and only if you bundle up properly." They ate quickly, Lila barely tasting her food in her eagerness to get outside. Elena helped her into her new coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck, pulled on the boots they'd bought in town. "Stay where we can see you," Elena said. "The drifts are deep and you're small." Lila nodded and practically tumbled out the door into the snow. Elena and Caleb stood on the porch, watching as the girl took her first steps into the unmarked white, sinking up to her knees with each step. Lila laughed. An actual laugh, clear and bright and completely unguarded. The sound hit Elena like a physical thing, unexpected and precious. "First time I've heard her do that," Caleb said quietly. "Me too." They watched as Lila fell backward into the snow and started making angels, her arms and legs sweeping through the powder. Then she rolled over and started building what might have been a snowman or might have been just a pile of snow shaped by a 7-year-old's imagination. "She's just a kid," Elena said. "We forget that sometimes. She's been through so much that we see the trauma first, but underneath it all, she's just a kid who wants to play in the snow." "Should we help her?" "No, let her have this. Let her just be happy for a minute without adults hovering." So they stood there, 2 adults who didn't know what they were doing, watching a child remember how to be a child. And for that moment, everything else fell away. The uncertainty about the future, the fear of failure, the weight of the past, all of it disappeared into the white silence of falling snow. Lila played until her cheeks were red and her mittens were soaked through. When she finally came back inside, she was shivering but smiling. "That was fun," she said, her teeth chattering. Elena helped her out of the wet clothes and wrapped her in a blanket by the fire. Caleb made hot tea with honey, and they all sat together while Lila warmed up. "Mama used to make snow ice cream," Lila said suddenly. "When I was little, she'd take clean snow and mix it with milk and sugar and vanilla." It was the first time she'd mentioned Mary without sadness coating every word. Just a memory, simple and sweet, shared because it fit the moment. "We could make some," Elena said. "If you want." "Really?" "Sure. We've got everything we need, and there's certainly enough snow." They spent the afternoon making snow ice cream, Lila carefully measuring ingredients while Elena stirred and Caleb collected fresh snow from the porch. The result was cold and sweet and not quite the same as real ice cream, but Lila ate it with obvious pleasure. "Mama made it better," she said, "but this is good too." "That's okay," Elena said. "Nobody makes things exactly the same as someone else, but we can make our own version that's still good." Lila thought about this. "Like how you and Papa aren't like Mama and Thomas, but you're still good?" The question was so direct, so honest, that Elena had to take a moment before answering. "Yes," she said finally. "Like that." "Okay." Lila scraped the last of the ice cream from her bowl. "I think I like our version." The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being trapped in the cabin together, forced into proximity without the escape of errands or chores that took them outside. Elena had worried it would feel suffocating, but instead it became something else. They fell into a rhythm without planning it. Mornings, Caleb taught Lila basic mathematics using dried beans as counters. Afternoons, Elena worked with her on reading, pushing her beyond the simple primers she'd mastered. Evenings, they all sat by the fire while Caleb told stories about the mountain. Some true, some probably embellished, all of them engaging enough to keep Lila's attention. And in the quiet moments between, Elena found herself watching them. Caleb's patience as he explained division for the 3rd time. Lila's concentration as she sounded out difficult words. The way they were learning each other's rhythms, fitting together like pieces that didn't match perfectly, but still made something whole. On the 3rd night, after Lila had gone to bed, Elena sat with Caleb by the dying fire and said what she'd been building toward for days. "I want to tell you something about Annie." Caleb looked at her, waiting. "The day she drowned," Elena continued, her voice steady despite the pain of remembering. "I was arguing with a man I'd been seeing. Stupid argument about something I can't even remember now. He'd shown up at the park unannounced, wanted to talk, and I was angry that he'd interrupted my time with Annie, but I engaged anyway. Stood there fighting about nothing while a 5-year-old girl wandered off to look at ducks." She stopped, swallowing hard. "By the time I noticed she was gone, by the time I ran to the pond, she was already under the water. I pulled her out, tried to help her breathe, but it was too late. She was just gone." Caleb didn't say anything, just listened. "The Hawthorns, her parents, they arrived while I was still holding her, still trying to make her wake up, even though I knew she wouldn't. Her mother screamed. Her father just stood there like someone had cut all his strings. And I kept thinking, this is my fault. I killed their daughter because I couldn't be bothered to pay attention for 5 minutes." "It was an accident," Caleb said quietly. "Was it, or was it negligence? Where's the line between the two?" "I don't know, but I know you didn't want her to die. You didn't choose for that to happen." "No, but I chose to look away. I chose to prioritize my own drama over her safety. That was a choice, even if the consequence wasn't intended." Elena looked at him directly. "That's what I've been afraid of, that I'd make another choice like that. Look away at the wrong moment, prioritize the wrong thing, and Lila would pay the price." "Has that happened since you've been here?" Elena thought about the past month, about all the moments she'd been paying attention, keeping Lila in sight, making sure she was safe, about how careful she'd been, how vigilant. "No," she admitted. "Then maybe you learned from what happened. Maybe that's the point. Not that you'll never make a mistake again, but that you'll make different mistakes, better ones." "Better mistakes?" "Ones that come from trying too hard instead of not trying enough. I'd take that over not trying at all." Elena absorbed this. It wasn't forgiveness. She didn't deserve that and wasn't asking for it. But it was something. Perspective, maybe. Or just acknowledgement that people could fail and still be worth something. I'm thinking about staying, she said. Past 6 months, if you still want me to. Caleb's expression shifted, something like relief washing over his features. I do. I can't promise I'll be good at it. Can't promise I won't screw up in some spectacular way. I'm not asking for promises, just effort. I can do effort. Then that's enough. They sat in silence for a while, and Elena felt something unclenching inside her. Not healing, she wasn't sure that was possible, but loosening, like maybe she could carry this guilt without it crushing her completely. I need to tell Lila, she said. Tomorrow. She deserves to know I'm not planning to leave. She'll be happy. Maybe. Or maybe she'll be angry that I made her wait this long to decide. Either way, she'll know where she stands. That's what matters. The next morning, Elena knocked on Lila's door before the girl had gotten up. Lila answered, looking sleepy and confused. Can I come in? Elena asked. Okay. Elena sat on the edge of Lila's bed, and the girl sat up, pulling Rosie into her lap like armor. I wanted to talk to you about something important, Elena said. About what happens after 6 months. Lila's expression went carefully blank. You're leaving. No, I'm staying. If you want me to. The girl blinked like she hadn't heard correctly. Staying? Here. Here, with you and your father, for as long as you need me. But you said, I know what I said. I was scared, and I thought leaving would be safer. But I was wrong. This is where I need to be. Lila's eyes filled with tears. What if you change your mind again? I might. People do sometimes. But I'm not making this decision lightly. I'm choosing to stay because I care about you and I want to be part of your life. That's real, even if it's scary. You promise? Elena thought about all the promises that had been broken, all the assurances that had turned out to be lies. She could promise, and probably Lila would believe her, but that wouldn't make it true. I can't promise nothing will ever change, Elena said honestly. But I can promise I'll try as hard as I can to be here, and if something does change, I'll tell you the truth about it. No surprises, no secrets, just honesty. Lila was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she said, Okay. Okay? I believe you. The girl wiped her eyes. Can I hug you? Elena's throat tightened. Yes. Lila threw her arms around Elena's neck and held on tight. Elena hugged her back, feeling the small body pressed against hers, warm and alive and trusting despite everything. Thank you for staying, Lila whispered. Thank you for giving me a reason to. They stayed like that for a while, two people who'd both lost someone precious, finding something new in each other. It wasn't a replacement. Lila would always miss Mary, and Elena would always carry Annie, but it was something real nonetheless. When they finally pulled apart, Lila's face was wet, but she was smiling. Can we make pancakes for breakfast? We can make whatever you want. Even if I want to help? Especially if you want to help. They went to the kitchen together and found Caleb already up, looking uncertain when he saw them. Everything okay? He asked. Everything's good, Elena said. We're making pancakes. Something passed between her and Caleb, understanding, relief, the beginning of something that looked like hope. He nodded once, then said, I'll get the skillet. They made breakfast together, the three of them crowded into the small kitchen, bumping elbows and laughing when Lila got flour on her nose. It was chaotic and imperfect and exactly what it needed to be. After breakfast, Caleb announced he needed to check the trap lines now that the storm had passed. Might be gone most of the day, he said. There's a lot of ground to cover. We'll be fine, Elena said. After he left, Elena and Lila settled into their usual routine, reading, writing practice, some simple arithmetic. But around midday, Lila set down her pencil and said, Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you love Papa? The question caught Elena off guard. What makes you ask that? Mrs. Chen asked if you loved each other, and you said love takes time. Has there been enough time yet? Elena considered how to answer. The truth was complicated. She cared about Caleb, respected him, felt comfortable with him in ways she hadn't felt comfortable with anyone in years. But love, that word felt too big, too weighted with expectations and fear. I care about your father very much, Elena said carefully. But love means different things to different people. Some people fall in love quickly, all at once. Other people grow into it slowly. I don't know which kind we are yet. But you want to find out? Yes, I do. Lila nodded, accepting this. Mama and Thomas loved each other. I could tell because they smiled when they looked at each other, even when they were arguing. That sounds nice. It was, but they also said love was work, that it didn't just happen, you had to choose it every day. Elena looked at this 7-year-old girl who'd absorbed so much wisdom from parents who were now gone. They were right. Love is a choice, and I'm choosing to stay and see what happens. That's my way of choosing it. Good. Lila picked up her pencil again. Because I like having you here. It feels like we're a real family now. Elena's chest tightened. We are a real family. Maybe not a traditional one, but real. The best kind, Lila said confidently, and went back to her arithmetic like she'd just solved the most important problem in the world. That evening, when Caleb returned with 3 rabbits and a tired smile, Elena pulled him aside while Lila was in her room. I told her I'm staying, Elena said. Past the 6 months, permanently, as far as I can promise anything. How did she take it? Better than I expected. Asked if I loved you. Caleb went very still. What did you tell her? That I cared about you. That love takes different forms and happens at different speeds. That I wanted to find out what we might become. And do you? Want to find out? Elena looked at him. This man who'd saved her without knowing it, who'd given her a purpose when she'd lost her own, who'd become someone she could imagine spending her life with, even though the idea still terrified her. Yes, she said. I do. Caleb stepped closer, and Elena felt her heart rate pick up. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm glad you're staying, he said quietly. Not just for Lila, for me too. That's new for you. Admitting you want something. You make me want to be braver. I don't feel brave. You are, though. Coming here, staying here, choosing to try despite everything you've been through. That's the bravest thing I've seen. Elena didn't know what to say to that. So instead of saying anything, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was brief and tentative, more question than answer, but when she pulled back, Caleb was smiling. What was that for? He asked. For being patient with me, for not pushing, for letting this become real. It was always real. You just needed time to see it. They heard Lila's door open and stepped apart quickly, like teenagers caught by parents. Lila appeared in the doorway and looked between them with knowing eyes. Were you kissing? She asked. Elena felt her face heat. Maybe. Good. Married people should kiss sometimes. Oh, really? Caleb said. Who told you that? Thomas told me. He said kissing was important because it meant you still liked each other, even when things were hard. Smart man, Elena said. He was. Lila's voice was wistful, but not devastated. I miss him. And Mama. But I'm glad I have you both now. She said it so simply, with such honest acceptance, that Elena felt tears prick her eyes. This child had lost everything and still found room in her heart for new people. Still chose to hope, despite every reason not to. If a 7-year-old could be that brave, surely Elena could manage it too. The weeks passed, and winter settled in properly. The snow piled higher, transforming the landscape into something beautiful and harsh. Caleb taught Lila to snowshoe, and Elena taught her to make bread from scratch. They celebrated Christmas with a small tree Caleb cut from the property and decorations Lila made from paper and pine cones. Lila started school after the new year, riding into town with Caleb twice a week. She came home with stories about the other children, about the teacher, Miss Brennan, who was strict but fair, about lessons that challenged her in new ways. There's a girl named Martha, Lila told them one evening. She asked if I wanted to sit with her at lunch. Did you? Elena asked. Yes, she's nice. She shared her cookies with me. That sounds like a good friend. She asked about you and Papa, about how you got married so fast. Elena and Caleb exchanged glances. What did you tell her? That sometimes people need help and other people help them, and sometimes that turns into a family. She said that made sense. Good answer, Caleb said. I thought so too. Mrs. Chen returned in late February for her follow-up visit. This time, there was no tension, no uncertainty about the outcome. She saw Lila thriving, healthy, engaged, doing well in school. She saw the cabin maintained and warm. She saw two adults who worked together seamlessly, who'd clearly become partners in more than just name. "I'm closing the case," Mrs. Chen said before she left. "Lila is exactly where she needs to be." After she'd gone, Lila asked what that meant. "It means you're staying," Elena said. "No more evaluations, no more worry about being taken away. This is your home, officially." Lila processed this with her usual seriousness. Then she said, "Can I call you Mama?" Elena felt her breath catch. "Do you want to? Mary will always be my mama, but she's gone, and you're here. And I think maybe I can have two mamas, one who's in my heart and one who's in my life." Elena had to blink back tears. "I would be honored if you called me Mama." "Okay, Mama." Lila tested the word, smiling. "It sounds right." That night, after Lila was asleep, Elena and Caleb sat on the porch despite the cold. The sky was clear, stars sharp and bright in the mountain darkness. "This is real now," Elena said. "Not temporary, not practice. Real. Does that scare you?" "Terrifies me, but I'm doing it anyway." Caleb reached for her hand and she let him take it. They sat like that, fingers intertwined, looking out at the mountain that had become their home. "I never thought I'd have this," Caleb said. "A family, a wife I actually care about, a daughter who knows me and chooses me anyway." "You almost didn't. If I'd said no that first day, but you didn't. You said yes, even though it was crazy, even though you had every reason to run." "I did run for 3 years. Coming here was supposed to be more running, just in a different direction." "What is it instead?" Elena thought about that. About Annie, whose death had broken something in her. About Lila, whose life had given her a reason to try being whole again. About Caleb, who'd shown her that broken people could build something together. "It's stopping," she said finally. "It's standing still and deciding this is far enough. This is where I belong." "You're sure?" "No, but I'm choosing it anyway." Caleb lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. That's all any of us can do. They sat in the cold silence until Elena started shivering, then went inside to the warmth. Lila's door was cracked open, and they could see her sleeping peacefully, Rosie tucked under one arm. "She's going to be okay," Caleb whispered. "Yes, she is. Because of you. Because of both of us. And because she's stronger than either of us gave her credit for." They went to their separate rooms, a boundary they maintained even as their relationship deepened, some things still requiring time and care. But Elena lay in bed that night and thought about the future instead of the past, about watching Lila grow up, about building a life with Caleb that was real and messy and good, about maybe, possibly, forgiving herself for Annie by not failing someone else. She pulled Annie's photograph from the drawer one last time, looked at that frozen face, that permanent smile. "I'm okay now," she whispered. "Not healed. Maybe never healed. But okay. I hope that's enough." She tucked the photograph back in the drawer, but this time she didn't take it out again the next day, or the day after that. It stayed there, present but not consuming her, a part of her past instead of her entire present. Spring came slowly to the mountain. The snow melted in patches, revealing the brown earth beneath. Flowers began to push through the soil, tentative at first, then bold. The stream swelled with runoff, and the deer returned to drink at dawn. Lila helped Elena plant a garden, tomatoes, beans, squash, herbs. They worked side by side in the dirt, and Elena taught her how to tell weeds from seedlings, how to water without drowning the roots. "Will they all grow?" Lila asked. "Some will, some won't. That's how gardens work. You plant more than you need and hope enough survive." "Like people." Elena looked at her. "What do you mean?" "We plant ourselves in places and hope we survive. Some people do. Some people don't. But you have to try anyway." At 7 years old, this child understood things Elena was still learning. "You're right," Elena said. "You plant yourself and you try." "And we survived," Lila said confidently. "All three of us. We're growing now." "Yes, we are." That evening, Caleb proposed properly. Not with a ring. They were already married after all, but with a question. "Will you stay married to me?" he asked. Not because of an arrangement or a deal, but because you want to, because this is what you choose. Elena looked at him, this man who'd been a stranger 6 months ago and was now someone she couldn't imagine living without. Yes, she said. This is what I choose. They told Lila at dinner and she clapped her hands together with pure joy. Does this mean you're really, really married now? Not just on paper? Really, really married, Elena confirmed. Good, because you belong together. All of us do. She was right. They did belong together. Not because they were perfect, but because they'd chosen each other despite their imperfections. Because they'd taken broken pieces and built something new. A family. Not conventional, not easy, but real. That night, Elena moved her things from her room to Caleb's loft. It was time. They'd earned this, earned each other through months of choosing each other every single day. As she climbed the ladder with her small bag of belongings, Caleb reached down to help her up. Their fingers touched, and Elena felt it again, that sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was supposed to be. Welcome home, Caleb said. I've been home for months. I just didn't realize it. They settled into the loft together, and through the floorboards below, they could hear Lila humming in her room. A child's voice, content and safe, singing to herself in the darkness. Elena closed her eyes and let herself feel it. The weight of choosing to stay. The risk of loving people who could be lost. The hope that maybe this time things would work out. She'd spent 3 years running from the possibility of failing again. But standing still was scarier and braver, and she was doing it anyway. Because that's what love was. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to stay despite it. Not the promise of perfection, but the commitment to try. Not forgetting the past, but refusing to let it dictate the future. In the morning, Elena woke before dawn and climbed down to start breakfast. She moved through the familiar kitchen, her hands knowing exactly where everything belonged now. This was her home. These were her people. She'd come to this mountain broken and convinced she'd only break everything she touched. But she'd been wrong. Sometimes broken people didn't just shatter each other further. Sometimes they fit together in unexpected ways, their cracks aligning to create something stronger than either of them had been alone. Sometimes running towards something was braver than running away. And sometimes the family you chose was more real than the one you were born into. Elena heard movement behind her and turned to see Lila padding out in her nightgown, sleepy-eyed and beautiful. "Morning, Mama," the girl said, and the words still made Elena's heart catch. "Morning, sweetheart. Sleep well?" "I did. I dreamed about the garden, about everything growing. That's a good dream." "It was." Lila climbed into her chair at the table. "Mama, do you think Mama Mary and Thomas would be happy that I'm happy here?" Elena thought about 2 people who'd loved this child enough to raise her as their own, who'd given her everything they had, who'd wanted nothing more than her happiness and safety. "Yes," she said, "I think they'd be very happy, because that's all parents really want, for their children to be loved and safe. And you are both those things." "I know," Lila smiled. "I'm lucky." "We all are." Caleb appeared, drawn by the smell of coffee and the sound of voices. He kissed Elena's cheek, still new enough to be thrilling, familiar enough to feel right, and ruffled Lila's hair. "What's the plan for today, Ease?" he asked. "School for Lila. Then I thought we could work on the garden this afternoon. It needs weeding." "Sounds good." They ate breakfast together, the 3 of them, in the cabin that had transformed from shelter to home. Outside, the sun rose over the mountain, painting everything gold. The world was waking up, starting over, trying again. Just like them. And in that moment, Elena understood something she'd been too afraid to believe before. Redemption wasn't about erasing your failures. It was about not letting them be the end of your story. She'd failed Annie. That would never change. The guilt would never fully disappear. But she hadn't failed Lila. And she wouldn't fail Caleb. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Not to forgive herself completely, but to let herself live anyway, to let herself love anyway, to let herself try and fail and try again, because that's what being human meant. The story of how 3 broken people became a family wasn't neat or perfect. It was messy and complicated and full of moments where any of them could have walked away. But they didn't. They stayed. They tried. They chose each other every single day until choosing each other became as natural as breathing, And that, imperfect and hard won and absolutely real, was everything.